Who was Balaam really? Was he a true prophet of God or a greedy fortune teller? Why did God allow a donkey to speak? And what was so dangerous about Balaam's journey that an angel had to intervene? In this video, we're going to uncover the complete story of one of the Bible's most enigmatic characters, from his supernatural encounter with a talking animal to his tragic downfall that made his name synonymous with spiritual compromise. We'll explore the historical context, the theological implications, and why this ancient story contains urgent warnings for believers today. But before we get started, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you haven't already. It helps a lot. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The Enigma of Balaam. Picture this scene. A dusty road winds through ancient hills. The sun beats down mercilessly. A man sits atop his donkey, traveling toward what he believes is his destiny. Then something impossible happens. The donkey stops, refuses to move. The man strikes the animal again and again until the donkey turns its head and speaks. "Why do you beat me?" the donkey asks, as naturally as morning follows night. The man answers. He argues with his donkey as if this conversation happens every day. Two beings locked in debate on a lonely road thousands of years ago. This moment would echo through centuries of human storytelling. The man's name was Balaam, son of Beor, a prophet whose story defies simple explanation. Some call him a hero. Others brand him a villain. The truth lies somewhere between these extremes, wrapped in mystery and contradiction. Balaam spoke with God, yet he also practiced divination. He blessed Israel with beautiful words, yet he may have caused their downfall. He rode toward riches and honor, yet he met an angel with a drawn sword on that same road. His tale begins in the ancient Near East, where kingdoms rose and fell like desert winds, where God spoke through dreams and omens, where a single word from the right prophet could topple armies or crown kings. Balaam lived in this world of divine voices and earthly power. The story comes to us through ancient Hebrew texts, written by people who both revered and feared this strange prophet. They remembered his words of blessing. They also remembered his final fate. Both memories shaped how they told his tale. What makes Balaam so fascinating goes beyond the talking donkey, though that scene certainly captures our imagination. More than any other biblical figure, Balaam exists in the spaces between certainties, between prophet and sorcerer, between blessing and curse, between loyalty and betrayal. He possessed genuine prophetic gifts. This much seems clear from the record. When he spoke, his words carried weight that reached across generations. Kings sought his services, nations trembled at his pronouncements, yet something about him remained unsettled, untrustworthy. Ancient writers struggled to categorize him. Was he a true prophet of the Most High, or merely a gifted fortune teller who occasionally stumbled upon divine truth? The texts themselves seem uncertain. They praise his oracles while questioning his motives. This uncertainty creates part of Balaam's enduring appeal. He represents something we recognize in ourselves, the capacity for both noble speech and questionable action, the ability to speak truth while harboring selfish desires, the human tendency to serve two masters. His donkey sees what he cannot. An angel blocks their path, sword drawn and ready. The animal saves both their lives through disobedience. Meanwhile, the prophet remains blind to immediate danger while claiming to see the distant future. The irony runs deep. Balaam's story unfolds against the backdrop of Israel's wilderness wanderings. 40 years of desert life had hardened the Hebrew tribes into a formidable force. They approached the borders of settled lands. Their reputation preceded them. Stories of miraculous victories, of cities conquered and armies defeated. This reputation terrified the kings of Canaan, none more so than Balak, ruler of Moab. He watched Israel's approach with growing alarm. Military solutions seemed inadequate, so he turned to spiritual warfare. He summoned the most famous curse speaker of his day. Balaam lived far to the north in Pethor by the Euphrates River. His fame had spread throughout the region. Kings consulted him before battles. Merchants sought his blessing before long journeys. His words could make or break fortunes. The distance Balak's messengers traveled speaks to Balaam's reputation. Hundreds of miles across dangerous territory, through desert and hostile kingdoms, all to secure the services of one man. This investment suggests extraordinary confidence in his abilities. Yet when the prophet finally arrived in Moab, everything went sideways. Instead of cursing Israel, he blessed them. Instead of weakening their resolve, he strengthened their confidence. Instead of serving his patron's interests, he served a higher calling. The story raises questions that still puzzle readers today. Can someone speak God's truth while harboring impure motives? Does divine inspiration require personal righteousness? Can prophecy flow through flawed vessels? Balaam's tale suggests complex answers. He demonstrates that God's purposes can work through unlikely channels, that truth can emerge from surprising sources, that human weakness doesn't automatically disqualify someone from divine service. At the same time, his story warns against presuming on divine favor, against treating sacred gifts as personal possessions, against assuming that spiritual abilities guarantee spiritual maturity. These themes resonate across cultures and centuries. Every generation discovers new layers in Balaam's story, new warnings, new insights, new questions about the relationship between divine calling and human character. The talking donkey remains the most memorable element, yet it serves as more than mere spectacle. The animal's speech reveals deeper truths about perception and wisdom, about who truly sees clearly, about the unexpected sources of divine revelation. As we begin this journey through Balaam's complete story, we enter a world both foreign and familiar, ancient customs and timeless human nature, divine interventions and earthly politics, sacred callings and personal ambitions. The road to Moab stretches before us. Along the way, we'll encounter more than just a prophet and his donkey. We'll discover questions about ourselves, about power and prophecy, about the complex dance between heaven and earth. Moab on the brink. The wilderness years had transformed Israel from fleeing slaves into a conquering force. 40 years of divine provision had bred confidence in their ranks. Manna fell each morning. Water flowed from rocks. Their clothes never wore out. Their shoes never needed replacement. They moved like a slow-burning fire across the landscape, not rushing, but relentless. Each camp became a temporary city. Each departure marked another step toward their promised inheritance. The desert had become their teacher, hardship their trainer. Word of their victories preceded them like thunder before lightning. The defeat of the Amorite kings Sihon and Og had sent shockwaves throughout the region. These weren't minor tribal skirmishes. These were complete conquests of established kingdoms. Sihon had ruled from Heshbon with an iron fist. His territory stretched across the fertile plateau east of the Jordan River. His armies had never known defeat, until Israel arrived at his borders requesting safe passage. His refusal led to his downfall. The battle was swift and decisive. Sihon's experienced warriors fell before these desert wanderers. His cities opened their gates in surrender. His kingdom became Israel's inheritance in a matter of days. Og of Bashan followed the same pattern. This giant king ruled from 60 fortified cities. His bed was made of iron, stretching 13 feet long. His reputation for strength was legendary. Yet he too fell before Israel's advance. These victories established a new reality in the ancient Near East. Israel was no longer just a wandering tribe. They had become a regional power. Their God was no longer just a desert deity. He had proven himself in battle against established kingdoms. King Balak of Moab watched these developments with growing terror. His kingdom lay directly in Israel's path. The Jordan River formed a natural boundary, but rivers could be crossed. Mountains could be climbed. Walls could be breached. Moab traced its origins back to Lot, Abraham's nephew. This connection made them distant relatives of Israel. Yet family ties rarely prevented ancient warfare. If anything, such relationships often intensified conflicts. The Moabites had built their civilization on the eastern shores of the Dead Sea. Their territory stretched across fertile highlands and valleys. They controlled important trade routes between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Their cities flourished through commerce and agriculture. Balak had inherited a stable kingdom from his predecessors. His people enjoyed prosperity and relative peace. His armies maintained order throughout his territory. His treasuries held sufficient gold and silver for any emergency. But watching Israel's approach changed everything. Military advisors offered no encouraging assessments. Their armies couldn't match Israel's battle-tested warriors. Their fortifications wouldn't hold against enemies who had divine assistance. Diplomatic solutions seemed equally hopeless. Israel showed no interest in negotiations. They hadn't sought treaties with Sihon or Og. They simply demanded passage and took what they wanted when refused. Economic incentives held no appeal either. Israel carried their own provisions. They needed no trade agreements or commercial partnerships. They sought land for permanent settlement, not temporary advantage. This left Balak facing an impossible situation. Traditional responses to military threats had proven useless. His kingdom possessed no weapons effective against divinely assisted enemies. His allies offered no meaningful support. The psychological pressure was enormous. Every morning brought Israel closer to his borders. Every evening found them camped nearer to his cities. Their campfires dotted the landscape like stars fallen to earth. Moabite sentries reported the same scene night after night, thousands of tents arranged in perfect order, smoke rising from countless cooking fires, the sound of voices carrying across the valleys, a nation on the move. Sleep became difficult for Balak and his advisors. How do you defend against an army that never seems to suffer casualties? How do you negotiate with people who claim divine backing for every demand? How do you maintain morale when defeat seems inevitable? The king's court buzzed with desperate suggestions. Some counselors advocated immediate flight, better to abandon the kingdom than face certain destruction. Others recommended preemptive surrender. Perhaps submission would bring more favorable terms than resistance. A few brave voices suggested military action. Strike first, while Israel remained camped across the border. Use Moab's knowledge of local terrain to advantage. Make them pay dearly for every mile of conquered territory. But Balak understood the futility of such measures. Military might hadn't saved Sihon or Og. Defensive positions hadn't protected their cities. Experienced armies hadn't prevented their defeat. This desperation drove him toward a different solution. If conventional warfare couldn't stop Israel, perhaps spiritual warfare could. If physical weapons proved useless, maybe supernatural ones would work. The ancient world recognized curses as legitimate weapons. Properly spoken by the right person, they could devastate armies more thoroughly than swords. They could bring disease, confusion, and terror upon enemies. They could turn certain victory into crushing defeat. But effective cursing required special skills. Not everyone could speak words that carried supernatural power. The most effective curse speakers possessed rare combinations of knowledge, authority, and divine connection. Balak knew of such a man. His reputation extended far beyond Moab's borders. Kings throughout the region consulted him before major decisions. His blessings brought prosperity. His curses brought ruin. His name was Balaam, son of Beor. The decision to summon Balaam represented both hope and desperation. Hope that spiritual weapons might succeed where physical ones had failed. Desperation born from the absence of better alternatives. Distance complicated the plan. Balaam lived in Pethor near the Euphrates River. The journey would take weeks through dangerous territory. The expense would strain even Moab's treasury. Yet Balak saw no choice. Every day of delay brought Israel closer to his borders. Every night of inaction increased his people's fear. The time for half measures had passed. He called for his most trusted messengers, men who could travel swiftly and speak persuasively, men who understood the gravity of their mission. The future of Moab would depend on their success. The preparations began immediately. Gifts worthy of a famous prophet, gold and silver in abundance, precious stones and fine fabrics, everything necessary to demonstrate both respect and urgency. Balak crafted his message carefully. He needed to convey desperation without appearing weak, show respect without seeming subservient, offer generous payment without suggesting unlimited resources. As his messengers prepared for departure, Balak climbed to his palace roof. The evening light revealed Israel's campfires twinkling in the distance. Tomorrow they would be closer. The day after, closer still. Time was running out for Moab. Everything now depended on one man's willingness to travel south and speak words of power against Israel. The fate of kingdoms hung in the balance. Introducing Balaam. Far to the north, beyond the great bend of the Euphrates River, lay the ancient city of Pethor. Its markets bustled with merchants from distant lands. Its temples housed priests who claimed knowledge of many gods. Its streets echoed with the sounds of multiple languages and cultures. Here lived a man whose reputation had spread like ripples across the ancient world. Balaam, son of Beor, belonged to that rare class of individuals who seem to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. His words carried weight beyond their natural meaning. His presence commanded respect from kings and commoners alike. The ancient Near East teemed with diviners, fortune-tellers, and would-be prophets. Every city had its share of men who claimed special knowledge of divine will. Most offered little more than clever guesswork wrapped in mysterious language. They survived on the gullibility of desperate clients. Balaam was different. His prophecies came true with disturbing regularity. His blessings brought tangible results. His curses carried consequences that terrified even skeptics. Something about him transcended mere human wisdom or intuition. He had mastered the ancient arts of divination that flourished throughout Mesopotamia, reading omens in the flight of birds, interpreting patterns in scattered oil drops, finding messages in the arrangement of animal entrails. These skills required years of study and practice, yet his abilities went beyond learned techniques. When Balaam spoke in the grip of prophetic inspiration, his voice took on qualities that made listeners tremble. His eyes saw beyond present circumstances into future realities. His words painted pictures of events yet to unfold. Kings sought his counsel before major decisions. Would this battle bring victory or defeat? Should this alliance be pursued or avoided? Would this harvest prove abundant or scarce? Balaam's answers shaped the policies of nations. Merchants consulted him before launching trading expeditions. His blessing could mean the difference between prosperity and bankruptcy. A favorable word from Balaam opened doors that remained closed to others. His endorsement carried the weight of divine approval. Common people also found their way to his door. Anxious parents seeking guidance about their children's futures, farmers hoping for assurance about their crops, travelers requesting protection for dangerous journeys. All believed Balaam could influence their destinies. This reputation brought both benefits and burdens. Wealthy clients provided generous compensation for his services. His house reflected his prosperity through fine furnishings and expensive decorations. Servants attended to his daily needs. Guards protected his property. But fame also attracted unwanted attention. Rivals spread rumors about his methods. Religious authorities questioned his orthodox credentials. Political enemies suggested his loyalties were for sale. The higher his reputation climbed, the more targets appeared on his back. Balaam navigated these challenges with careful diplomacy. He avoided taking sides in local political disputes. He refused to curse anyone without divine authorization. He maintained relationships with multiple kingdoms without showing clear favoritism. This balanced approach had served him well for decades. His neutral status made him valuable to all parties. Kings trusted him precisely because he didn't belong exclusively to any one nation. His foreign origin became an asset rather than a liability. The source of his prophetic abilities remained mysterious even to Balaam himself. He experienced visions that came without warning or invitation. Voices spoke to him in dreams with absolute clarity. Knowledge appeared in his mind fully formed, as if placed there by invisible hands. These experiences defied simple explanation. They didn't follow the patterns described in divination manuals. They couldn't be summoned through ritual techniques. They arrived according to schedules beyond human control. Balaam had learned to recognize the difference between ordinary intuition and genuine revelation. True prophetic knowledge carried distinctive qualities. It felt heavier than human thoughts. It demanded expression through specific words. It brought consequences that outlasted the moment of speaking. This discernment had preserved his reputation through challenging situations. Lesser prophets ruined themselves by claiming divine inspiration for every random thought. They spoke too often and promised too much. Their failures exposed their pretensions. Balaam spoke more cautiously. He waited for unmistakable signs of divine communication. He qualified his statements when uncertainty remained. He admitted the limits of his knowledge rather than inventing answers. This honesty enhanced rather than diminished his credibility. His living arrangements reflected his unusual position. The house occupied a prominent location near Pethor's center. Its architecture combined local styles with foreign influences. Visitors from many cultures felt comfortable within its walls. A library contained scrolls and tablets from various traditions. Egyptian wisdom literature sat beside Babylonian omen texts. Hittite diplomatic correspondence shared shelves with Canaanite religious poetry. Balaam studied all these traditions without committing exclusively to any. His household staff included people from multiple ethnic backgrounds. This diversity reflected both his cosmopolitan outlook and practical needs. Different languages and customs required servants who could navigate various cultural expectations. Balaam maintained correspondence with colleagues throughout the region. Letters arrived regularly from other diviners, priests, and court advisors. These connections kept him informed about political developments and religious trends across many kingdoms. Despite his international fame, Balaam remained fundamentally alone. His gifts isolated him from ordinary human relationships. People approached him seeking supernatural assistance rather than simple friendship. They wanted his prophetic abilities rather than his personal company. This isolation bred a complex personality, publicly confident and authoritative, privately uncertain and sometimes lonely, capable of speaking divine truth with absolute conviction, yet troubled by questions about his own spiritual condition. The tension would soon face its greatest test. Unknown to Balaam as he went about his daily routines, messengers were traveling north with an offer that would challenge everything he thought he understood about himself and his calling. The comfortable life he had built in Pethor was about to be disrupted. The careful balance he had maintained between divine service and personal profit was about to be tested. The reputation he had cultivated over decades was about to face its ultimate examination. Change approached like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. Soon those clouds would unleash winds that would transform not only Balaam's life, but the destiny of nations. The prophet who thought he controlled his own fate was about to discover the limits of human planning. The first summons. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the evening quiet around Balaam's house. Dust clouds marked the messenger's arrival long before their faces became visible. These weren't local travelers. Their mounts showed signs of hard riding across great distances. Their clothing bore the dust of many kingdoms. Balaam watched from his window as the delegation dismounted in his courtyard. 5 men, each carrying himself with the bearing of nobility. Their leader stepped forward and requested audience with the famous son of Beor. The urgency in his voice suggested matters of great importance. Within the hour, Balaam found himself seated across from representatives of King Balak of Moab. Their leader, a silver-haired diplomat named Bukir, spoke with careful precision. Every word had been rehearsed during their long journey north. Israel approaches our borders like a plague of locusts, Bukir began. They devour everything in their path. King Sihon's armies fell before them like wheat before the scythe. Og of Bashan's mighty fortresses crumbled at their advance. The other messengers nodded grimly. Each had witnessed the aftermath of Israel's victories. Empty cities, abandoned farmlands, refugees streaming east with tales of supernatural warfare. The scope of destruction defied normal military explanation. My king offers you honors beyond imagination, Bukir continued. Gold enough to fill your treasury, silver to decorate your house. Whatever reward you name shall be yours. Only come and curse this people for us. Balaam listened without interruption. His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. Years of diplomatic experience had taught him the value of measured responses. Hasty answers often led to regrettable consequences. The offer was extraordinary by any standard. Balak's messengers had brought samples of the promised payment. Gold coins bearing the king's image, silver cups of exquisite craftsmanship, precious stones that caught and reflected the lamplight. The display represented more wealth than most men saw in a lifetime. Yet, something about the request troubled Balaam deeply. Cursing Israel felt different from his usual commissions. Previous clients had sought his services against traditional enemies, rival kingdoms competing for territory or trade routes, personal disputes requiring supernatural intervention. This situation carried different implications. Israel's recent victories suggested divine favor of unusual intensity. Their God had demonstrated power that exceeded anything Balaam had previously encountered. Challenging such force could bring devastating consequences. Your king's generosity honors me beyond measure, Balaam replied carefully. Allow me to seek divine guidance overnight. I will give you answer in the morning. The messengers exchanged glances. They had expected immediate acceptance. Few prophets required extended consideration when offered such generous terms. Balaam's hesitation suggested either extraordinary wisdom or troubling reluctance. That night, Balaam sought the divine presence with unusual intensity. He employed every technique learned through decades of practice. Incense burned on his private altar, sacred texts lay open before him. His mind emptied itself of worldly concerns. The response came with startling clarity. A voice spoke in the darkness of his chamber, not the subtle impression that sometimes guided his pronouncements. This was direct communication that left no room for misinterpretation. "Who are these men with you?" the voice asked. Balaam explained about Balak's messengers and their urgent request. He described the offer of wealth and honor. He mentioned the king's fear of Israel's approaching army. The divine response came immediately and absolutely. "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." The finality of these words settled over Balaam like a heavy blanket. No room for negotiation, no alternative suggestions, no possibility of compromise. The matter was closed before it had truly opened. Morning light found the messengers eager for Balaam's response. They had spent the night discussing strategy for their return journey. Bukir had already composed the message he would deliver to King Balak. Success seemed assured. Balaam's words shattered their confidence like a hammer striking glass. "Return to your land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." The simplicity of his refusal left them speechless. No explanation of the decision process, no discussion of alternative approaches, no suggestion that different terms might change his mind. Just absolute rejection of their carefully crafted proposal. Bukir struggled to maintain diplomatic composure. "Surely the great son of Beor desires time to consider our king's generous offer. Perhaps we have not adequately expressed his majesty's deep respect for your abilities." But Balaam's expression remained unchanged. "I have received my answer. Nothing you could offer would alter this decision. Return to King Balak with my regrets." The messengers departed with heavy hearts and lighter purses. Their mission had failed completely. The wealth they had brought to impress Balaam would return unused to Moab's treasury. Their king's hopes would be crushed by a simple refusal. During their journey south, they debated what had gone wrong. Perhaps they had approached Balaam incorrectly. Maybe their initial offer had been insufficient. Could political considerations have influenced his decision? None of their theories satisfied them completely. Balaam's refusal had seemed absolute rather than negotiable. His manner suggested divine constraint rather than human reluctance. Something beyond politics or payment had determined his response. Meanwhile, Balaam wrestled with his own thoughts about the encounter. The divine prohibition had been clear and unmistakable, yet part of him wondered about the missed opportunity. The wealth offered by Balak's messengers could have secured his future for decades. He had built his reputation partly on saying yes when other prophets said no. His willingness to travel great distances for important clients had distinguished him from competitors. This refusal marked a departure from his usual business practices. Yet the voice he had heard left no room for doubt. This wasn't a matter for human calculation or negotiation. The decision had been made at levels far above his authority. His role was simply to obey rather than understand. The implications troubled him more than he admitted to himself. If Israel carried such divine protection that even mentioning curses against them was forbidden, what did this suggest about their future? How far would their conquests extend? Which kingdoms would fall next? These questions would haunt Balaam in the days ahead. The comfortable certainties of his established life had been shaken by one night's divine communication. He had glimpsed powers and purposes beyond his usual experience. The first summons had been refused. But Balaam sensed this wasn't the end of the matter. Desperate kings rarely accepted initial rejections gracefully. Balak would likely try again with different messengers or better offers. When that time came, Balaam wondered if his resolve would prove as firm as his initial refusal. The voice had been clear about this particular request. But what if circumstances changed? What if the terms became more attractive? What if the divine will proved more flexible than it first appeared? These questions would soon receive their answers. The road to Moab stretched before him like a test of character. His choices in the coming days would determine not only his personal fate, but the destiny of nations. The second embassy, King Balak, received his messenger's report with the fury of a man watching his kingdom slip away. The simple refusal cut deeper than elaborate explanations might have done. Balaam hadn't even dignified their offer with detailed consideration. He had dismissed them like common beggars. But desperation breeds persistence. As Israel's campfires grew brighter each night along his borders, Balak's determination intensified rather than weakened. If ordinary messengers couldn't persuade the prophet, perhaps extraordinary ones could succeed. The second embassy would exceed the first in every measurable way. Instead of 5 officials, Balak selected 12. Each held rank higher than those who had traveled before. Their names commanded respect throughout the region. Their presence would demonstrate the gravity of Moab's situation. Prince Zimri would lead this delegation. As Balak's eldest son, his involvement signaled royal desperation. No king sent his heir on diplomatic missions unless the kingdom's survival hung in the balance. Zimri's presence would communicate urgency more effectively than any words. The gifts accompanying this embassy dwarfed those carried by the first messengers. Caravans of camels bore treasures worthy of temple offerings, gold vessels crafted by master artisans, silver ornaments that caught sunlight like captured stars, rare spices worth their weight in precious metals. Balak composed his message with painstaking care. Each phrase was weighed for maximum impact. Every argument was crafted to appeal to different aspects of Balaam's character. The letter became a masterpiece of diplomatic persuasion. "Let nothing hinder you from coming to me," the message read. "I will surely do you great honor, and whatever you say to me, I will do. Come, curse this people for me." The promise was breathtaking in its scope. Whatever you say to me, I will do. Balak was offering to make Balaam a partner in governing Moab. The prophet could name his own terms and expect immediate compliance. The journey north proceeded with unprecedented speed. Fresh horses waited at regular intervals. Local governors received orders to provide every assistance. The delegation moved like wind across the landscape, driven by royal urgency. Balaam watched their approach with mixed feelings. He had expected Balak to try again, but not with such overwhelming force. The size of this embassy suggested desperation approaching panic. 12 princes didn't travel hundreds of miles for casual consultation. Prince Zimri presented his father's message with all the ceremony due a document of state. The other nobles arranged themselves in formal ranks behind him. Their very presence transformed Balaam's modest courtyard into something resembling a throne room. The new offer exceeded anything Balaam had previously been offered. Not just wealth, but political power. Not just payment for services, but partnership in governance. Balak was essentially offering to make him co-ruler of Moab. "Even if Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold," Balaam replied slowly, "I cannot go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do less or more." The words carried dignity and respect for his visitors, yet they also contained seeds of compromise that hadn't appeared in his first refusal. He was explaining his limitations rather than simply rejecting their proposal. More significantly, he continued speaking. "Now, therefore, please, you also stay here tonight, that I may know what more the Lord will say to me." This suggestion electrified the delegation. Stay here tonight. What more the Lord will say. Balaam was keeping the door open for further divine communication. Perhaps the first refusal hadn't been as final as it seemed. Prince Zimri's eyes brightened with renewed hope. His father's strategy appeared to be working. The enhanced embassy and improved offer had achieved what the first mission couldn't. They had earned serious reconsideration. That night, Balaam again sought divine guidance, but his approach differed subtly from his first inquiry. Previously, he had simply reported Balak's request and waited for response. Now he seemed to be seeking confirmation of what he hoped to hear. The divine voice came again, but with troubling ambiguity. "If the men come to call you, rise and go with them, but only the word which I speak to you that you shall do." Balaam pondered these words through the remaining hours of darkness. The permission seemed conditional: "If the men come to call you," but they were already here. They had already called him. What additional calling did the divine voice require? Perhaps the condition referred to their formal invitation in the morning. Maybe he needed to wait for their official summons before departing. The phrasing suggested procedural requirements that hadn't been fully met. Morning brought eager faces to his door. Prince Zimri and his companions had barely slept. They were ready to depart immediately with their distinguished guest. Victory seemed within their grasp. "The Lord has given permission for me to go with you," Balaam announced, "but understand that I can only speak the words he gives me to say." The qualification barely registered with his visitors. Permission to go was all they had hoped to achieve. They would deal with restrictions on his speech after arriving in Moab. The important thing was securing his presence. Preparations for departure began immediately. Balaam's servants gathered his traveling possessions. His donkey was saddled for the long journey south. The caravan formed up with the prophet, positioned among the Moabite nobles. Yet something felt wrong about the whole arrangement. The divine permission had been granted, but without enthusiasm. The conditions attached to it suggested reluctance rather than endorsement. Balaam sensed divine displeasure hovering over their departure. He pushed these concerns aside as the caravan began moving. Perhaps his discomfort stemmed from leaving his comfortable home for an uncertain journey. Maybe the divine restrictions reflected necessary caution rather than fundamental opposition. The road stretched ahead through familiar territory. Balaam had traveled these routes many times on various missions. The landmarks were known, the distances were measured. The journey should proceed without complications. But as they rode south toward Moab, Balaam couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing more than geographical boundaries. Something about this trip felt different from his previous travels. The weight of divine attention pressed upon him with unusual intensity. Behind them, Pethor faded into the distance. Ahead, Moab waited with its desperate king and impossible expectations. Between these points lay a road that would test everything Balaam thought he understood about prophecy, obedience, and the complex relationship between divine calling and human ambition. The second embassy had succeeded where the first had failed. But success in persuading Balaam to travel might prove quite different from success in achieving Balak's ultimate goals. The journey ahead would reveal whether divine permission and royal expectations could coexist peacefully. The angel in the road. The morning sun cast long shadows across the landscape as Balaam's caravan wound its way south toward Moab. The prophet rode his faithful donkey, a sturdy animal that had carried him safely on countless journeys. Behind him, Prince Zimri and the Moabite nobles maintained an atmosphere of quiet celebration. Their mission had succeeded beyond expectations. The famous son of Beor rode among them, committed to their cause. Soon King Balak would have his supernatural weapon against Israel. The balance of power in the region was about to shift dramatically. Balaam's thoughts wandered as his donkey picked its way along the familiar path. The divine permission still puzzled him. Why had the Lord changed his mind about the journey? The initial prohibition had seemed absolute. Yet somehow, the improved embassy had opened a door that previously remained locked. Perhaps the key lay in understanding divine priorities. The first refusal had been categorical because the first request was inappropriate. But when presented properly, with adequate respect and compensation, even God might reconsider. This interpretation satisfied Balaam's sense of both divine justice and personal worth. The road ahead stretched through a narrow valley between limestone hills. Vineyards covered the slopes on both sides, their vines heavy with ripening grapes. Stone walls bordered the path, marking property boundaries that had stood for generations. Balaam's donkey had traversed this route many times without incident. The animal knew every turn and slope by heart. Its steady gait reflected complete familiarity with the terrain. This was the safest and most direct path to their destination. Then, without warning, the donkey stopped. Its ears pricked forward, listening to something beyond human perception. Its eyes fixed on the road ahead with an intensity that made its muscles quiver. Every line of its body communicated alarm. Balaam felt the animal's tension through the reins. He looked ahead but saw nothing unusual. The path remained clear and inviting. No bandits lurked behind the stone walls. No wild animals blocked their progress. Yet his donkey refused to move forward. "Come on, you stubborn beast," Balaam muttered, pressing his heels against the animal's sides. but the donkey remained motionless, as if rooted to the spot by invisible chains. Growing impatient, Balaam struck the donkey with his staff. The blow accomplished nothing except to make the animal's trembling more pronounced. Whatever it sensed ahead commanded more respect than physical punishment. Behind them, the Moabite nobles watched with growing concern. Delays could prove costly if Israel continued their advance toward Moab's borders. Every hour mattered in their race against time. A stubborn donkey threatened to derail their carefully planned mission. "Perhaps we should find another mount for the prophet," suggested one of Zimri's advisors. "This animal seems unfit for such an important journey." But Balaam knew his donkey's character. The animal had never failed him in decades of travel. Its reluctance must have some cause beyond mere stubbornness. Something ahead commanded its attention with unusual force. The prophet dismounted and approached his donkey's head. He spoke soothingly while examining the animal for signs of injury or illness. Everything appeared normal except for the creature's fixed stare at the empty road ahead. "What do you see, old friend?" Balaam whispered, but the donkey offered no explanation for its behavior. It simply stood frozen, every nerve alert to a danger that remained invisible to human eyes. The standoff continued for several minutes. Balaam alternated between coaxing and commanding. The Moabite nobles grew increasingly restless. Time was slipping away while they dealt with an apparently irrational animal. Finally, the donkey began moving again. But instead of proceeding straight ahead, it veered sharply to the right. It pressed against the stone wall so closely that Balaam's foot scraped against the rough limestone. The animal seemed desperate to avoid whatever occupied the center of the path. "Control your beast, prophet," Prince Zimri called out with growing frustration. "We cannot afford these delays." Balaam felt embarrassed by his donkey's erratic behavior. The animal had never acted this way before. Its reputation for reliability had been one of the reasons he preferred it over horses for long journeys. Now it was making him look foolish before important clients. He struck the donkey again, harder this time. The animal flinched, but continued its peculiar sideways movement along the wall. Its breathing had become labored, as if great effort was required to maintain forward progress. The path ahead narrowed further as the stone walls closed in from both sides. Here there was no room for sideways movement. The donkey would have to proceed straight ahead or stop completely. Balaam felt certain this would resolve whatever strange behavior had possessed his mount. But as they approached the narrow section, the donkey's agitation increased dramatically. Its eyes rolled white with terror. Foam appeared around its bit. Its entire body shook as if gripped by fever or madness. Then, in the narrowest part of the passage, the animal simply collapsed. It folded its legs beneath itself and sank to the ground like a deflating waterskin. No amount of urging could make it rise. It lay in the dust, trembling and gasping. This was too much for Balaam's patience. His reputation was suffering before these important witnesses. His professional dignity was being undermined by an apparently deranged animal. The careful image he had cultivated over decades was crumbling because of a donkey's inexplicable behavior. He raised his staff high and brought it down across the animal's flanks with all his strength. Once, twice, 3 times. Each blow echoed off the stone walls like thunder. The donkey cried out in pain but made no effort to rise. "Why have you struck me these 3 times?" the donkey asked in a voice as clear as morning water. The words hung in the air like visible things. Every member of the caravan heard them distinctly. There was no mistaking what had occurred. The donkey had spoken with perfect clarity in the common language of the region. Balaam stared at his animal in complete shock. His staff hung limply in his hand. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The world had suddenly become a place where donkeys conversed with their masters. Yet somehow, the impossibility of the situation didn't prevent him from responding. "Because you have made a fool of me," he replied, as naturally as if such conversations happened daily. "If I had a sword in my hand, I would end your life right now. Am I not your donkey, on which you have ridden all your life until this day?" The animal continued. "Have I ever been in the habit of doing this to you?" The question struck Balaam with unexpected force. His donkey was absolutely right. In all their years together, the animal had never behaved irrationally. It had carried him safely through storms, bandits, and hostile territory. Its reliability had been beyond question until this moment. No, Balaam admitted reluctantly. The answer came automatically, drawn by the logic of the donkey's argument rather than conscious decision. Then something shifted in Balaam's vision, as if scales fell from his eyes. The empty road ahead was no longer empty. A figure stood blocking their path with a presence that explained everything that had happened. An angel of the Lord filled the narrow passage between the walls, not the gentle, ethereal being of artistic imagination. This was a warrior of heaven, terrible in his beauty and power. His sword was drawn and ready, its blade reflecting light that seemed to come from within the metal itself. The angel's eyes blazed with divine authority. His stance communicated both judgment and mercy held in perfect balance. He had been standing there all along, invisible to human perception, but clearly visible to the donkey's more sensitive awareness. Balaam fell on his face before the heavenly messenger. The staff that had beaten his faithful animal dropped from nerveless fingers. All his prophetic experience had not prepared him for this direct encounter with divine judgment. "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times?" the angel asked. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Behold, I have come out to stand against you, because your way is perverse before me." The words cut through Balaam's consciousness like a blade through silk. Perverse before me. His journey toward wealth and honor was being judged as fundamentally wrong. The divine permission he thought he had received was being revealed as something far more complex. "The donkey saw me and turned aside from me these 3 times, the angel continued. "If she had not turned aside from me, surely I would have ended your life by now and let her live." The implications staggered Balaam. His faithful animal had saved his life through apparent disobedience. The very behavior that had frustrated and embarrassed him had been the most reasonable response to their situation. The donkey had seen clearly while he remained blind. "I have sinned," Balaam confessed, his face still pressed against the dust of the road. "For I did not know you stood in the way against me. Now therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back." The offer came from genuine recognition of his error. He had been so focused on the honor and wealth awaiting him in Moab that he had missed the divine opposition to his journey. His donkey had been wiser than his master. But the angel's response surprised him. "Go with the men, but only the word that I speak to you, that you shall speak." Permission to continue, but with absolute restrictions on his freedom of speech. Balaam could proceed to Moab, but only as a mouthpiece for divine messages. His own agenda would have no place in what was to come. The angel vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. The road ahead became empty once again. But everything had changed in those moments of divine encounter. Balaam rose from the dust a different man than the one who had fallen. His donkey struggled to its feet, no longer trembling with terror. The faithful animal looked at its master with eyes that seemed to hold both forgiveness and understanding. Their relationship had been forever altered by the words they had exchanged. The Moabite nobles watched in stunned silence. They had witnessed conversations between prophets and animals. They had seen their guide prostrate himself before empty air. They had heard confessions of sin where no apparent wrongdoing had occurred. Prince Zimri broke the silence with cautious words. "Are you able to continue, great prophet? We still have far to travel before reaching my father's kingdom." Balaam nodded slowly as he remounted his donkey. But his enthusiasm for the journey had been fundamentally altered. He was no longer traveling toward opportunity and advancement. He was walking into a divine appointment whose outcome remained hidden from human understanding. The caravan resumed its southward progress, but the road ahead felt different now. What had begun as a journey toward wealth and honor had become something far more serious. Balaam rode toward Moab, carrying divine restrictions that would shape everything he said and did in the days ahead. Behind them, the narrow passage returned to ordinary appearance. But the memory of angelic presence would haunt that stretch of road forever. A place where heaven and earth had intersected, where a donkey's wisdom had exceeded human understanding, where a prophet had learned that his calling was larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The talking donkey. The impossible had become reality on a dusty road between limestone walls. A donkey had spoken with human voice, engaging its master in reasoned conversation. The laws of nature had bent to accommodate divine purpose. The boundary between animal and human had momentarily dissolved. Balaam stared at his mount with new eyes. This was no ordinary beast of burden. The animal that had carried him faithfully for years possessed depths of perception that exceeded his own. It had seen an angel where he saw empty air. It had recognized danger where he perceived only opportunity. The donkey's first words still echoed in his memory. "Why have you struck me these 3 times?" Not the random sounds one might expect from a magically empowered animal. This was articulate speech that addressed specific actions with logical precision. More remarkable still was the donkey's defensive argument. "Am I not your donkey, on which you have ridden all your life until this day? Have I ever been in the habit of doing this to you?" The animal had appealed to their shared history as evidence of its reliability. This wasn't mindless parroting of human speech. The donkey demonstrated reasoning ability that built arguments from evidence. It constructed logical defenses of its behavior. It engaged in dialogue rather than simply making sounds that resembled words. The implications troubled Balaam deeply. If donkeys could think and speak when divine power enabled them, what did this suggest about the nature of consciousness itself? Were animals simply mute versions of rational beings? Did they possess thoughts and feelings that normally remained hidden from human awareness? His relationship with this particular animal had spanned many years. They had traveled countless miles together. The donkey had never complained about heavy loads or difficult terrain. It had endured his occasional impatience without apparent resentment. Now Balaam wondered what thoughts had occupied the animal's mind during all those silent journeys. Had it formed opinions about their destinations? Did it have preferences about routes or resting places? Had it been a thinking companion all along, trapped in a body that couldn't express its thoughts? The donkey's behavior that morning suddenly made perfect sense. Faced with an armed angel blocking the road, the animal had tried every possible way to avoid disaster. First, it had simply stopped, hoping its master would notice the danger. When that failed, it had pressed against the wall, attempting to squeeze past the threat. Finally, trapped in the narrow passage with no room for maneuvering, the donkey had collapsed. This wasn't stubbornness or madness. It was the desperate act of a thinking being trying to prevent a catastrophe that only it could see. Balaam felt ashamed of his violent response to the animal's warnings. He had beaten his faithful companion for trying to save both their lives. His ignorance had led him to punish wisdom while rewarding folly. The donkey's physical form hadn't changed. Same brown coat marked with familiar scars. Same patient eyes that had watched countless sunrises on distant roads. Same steady gait that ate up miles without complaint. Yet everything about their relationship had been transformed. How do you treat an animal that has spoken to you with human voice? Do you continue giving commands as before? Can you maintain the master-servant relationship when the servant has demonstrated superior perception? These questions had no precedence in Balaam's experience. The Moabite nobles riding behind them seemed equally bewildered. Their worldview had been shattered in a matter of moments. They had come north seeking a prophet with supernatural abilities. Case, they were returning with a man whose donkey possessed gifts that exceeded his own. Prince Zimri struggled to maintain his diplomatic composure. The success of their embassy now seemed questionable. How could they present this development to King Balak? Would their sovereign believe that his expensive prophet took direction from his own mount? Yet they had all witnessed the conversation clearly. No tricks or illusions could account for what they had heard. The donkey had spoken with perfect clarity in their common language. Its words had been logical and appropriate to the situation. The animal's speech had also revealed character traits previously hidden from view. Loyalty, despite years of hard service. Patience, despite occasional harsh treatment. Wisdom that recognized spiritual realities beyond physical appearances. These qualities forced Balaam to reconsider his understanding of the creatures around him. Were all animals merely waiting for divine permission to reveal their thoughts? Did creation contain depths of consciousness that humans had never suspected? The theological implications were staggering. If God could grant speech to a donkey, what other miraculous interventions might be possible? Could stones cry out if necessary? Could trees bear witness to human actions? Could the entire creation participate in divine communication when circumstances required? Balaam's prophetic experience had prepared him for many unusual phenomena. He had received visions that transcended normal perception. He had heard voices that spoke divine truth directly to his consciousness. He had witnessed supernatural events that confirmed his calling. But nothing in his background had suggested that animals could become full participants in divine dialogue. This expanded his understanding of how heaven interacted with earth. The boundaries he had assumed were fixed proved more flexible than he had imagined. The donkey continued carrying him toward Moab with the same steady pace as always. But now Balaam listened for signs of further communication. Would the animal speak again? Did it have opinions about their destination? Was it aware of the political implications of their journey? These questions remained unanswered as the miles passed beneath them. The donkey had returned to normal animal behavior after its moment of miraculous speech. Perhaps divine permission for such communication was granted only when absolutely necessary. Still, Balaam found himself treating his mount with new respect. He spoke more gently when giving directions. He ensured the animal received adequate water and rest. He acknowledged that he traveled with a companion rather than merely riding a tool. The memory of their conversation would haunt him for the rest of his life. In moments of doubt or confusion, he would remember that even donkeys could speak divine truth when circumstances required. The humbling experience had taught him that wisdom could come from the most unexpected sources. As they approached the borders of Moab, Balaam realized that everything about his mission had changed. He was no longer simply a prophet traveling to serve a wealthy client. He had become part of a divine drama whose scope exceeded his understanding. The talking donkey had been more than a miraculous event. It had been a sign pointing toward greater revelations ahead. If God could use animals to speak truth, what other surprises awaited them in the days to come? The road stretched ahead through familiar territory, but Balaam rode it now with the knowledge that the ordinary world contained extraordinary possibilities. His donkey had taught him that divine communication could break through any barrier when the need was great enough. Soon they would reach King Balak's court. The desperate monarch would expect supernatural assistance against Israel. But Balaam now understood that his words would be controlled by the same divine power that had given voice to his faithful mount. The greatest conversation of his journey was over, but it had prepared him for even greater challenges ahead. The prophet who had learned from his donkey was about to discover what it truly meant to speak only the words that God provided. Arriving in Moab, the towers of our Moab rose from the landscape like prayers carved in stone. King Balak's capital commanded the heights above the Arnon River, its walls reflecting the afternoon sun with promise of safety and power. For generations, these fortifications had protected the heart of Moabite civilization from hostile armies and desert raiders. Balaam's caravan approached the city gates as evening shadows began lengthening across the valley. Guards recognized Prince Zimri's banners and opened the massive doors without delay. Word of their arrival spread through the streets like ripples across still water. Inside the walls, the city buzzed with anticipation. Citizens lined the roadways to catch glimpses of the famous prophet from the north. Children climbed onto rooftops for better views. Merchants ran in their stalls to witness this historic arrival. The fame of Balaam, son of Beor, had preceded him into Moab. Stories of his supernatural abilities had grown with each telling. Some claimed he could command the weather itself. Others insisted his blessings could make barren fields bloom with grain. But the prophet riding through their streets seemed surprisingly ordinary. He sat his donkey with quiet dignity, acknowledging the crowd's attention without arrogance. His clothing spoke of prosperity, but not ostentation. His manner suggested competence rather than theatricality. King Balak waited in his palace courtyard surrounded by the full splendor of his court. Golden ornaments caught torchlight and threw dancing patterns across marble walls. Incense burned in bronze braziers, filling the air with exotic fragrances. Musicians played soft melodies that whispered of ancient victories. The monarch had dressed for this occasion in his finest robes. Purple silk from distant lands draped his shoulders. Jeweled rings adorned his fingers. A crown of beaten gold proclaimed his authority to all who entered his presence. Yet beneath this magnificent display lay barely controlled desperation. Israel's campfires dotted the eastern horizon like earthbound stars. Each night they appeared closer to Moab's borders. Each dawn brought fresh reports of their relentless advance. Balaam dismounted before the palace steps with careful ceremony. His donkey stood patiently as servants took the reins. The same animal that had spoken divine warnings now appeared to be nothing more than a tired beast awaiting rest and fodder. "So you have come at last," Balak exclaimed, rising from his throne to greet his guest. "Did I not earnestly send to you? Why did you not come to me? Am I not able to honor you?" The questions carried undertones of relief mixed with reproach. Relief that the famous prophet had finally arrived. Reproach that his initial refusal had caused precious days of delay. Balaam bowed respectfully before responding. "Look, I have come to you. Now, have I any power at all to say anything? The word that God puts in my mouth, that I must speak." His answer carried both humility and warning. He had come as requested, but under divine constraints that might not align with royal expectations. The king who thought he was hiring a supernatural weapon might discover he had invited an independent voice. The subtle tension in Balaam's words escaped Balak's immediate attention. The desperate monarch focused only on the prophet's presence in his court. After weeks of anxiety, his spiritual solution had finally arrived. "You honor my kingdom with your presence," Balak replied formally. "Tomorrow we will begin the work that brought you here. Tonight, feast with me as my honored guest." The royal banquet that followed reflected Moab's wealth and sophistication. Tables groaned under the weight of delicacies from across the known world. Wine flowed from amphoras bearing seals of distant vineyards. Entertainment worthy of the greatest kingdoms delighted the assembled nobles, yet Balaam ate sparingly and drank little. The memory of his roadside encounter with the angel remained fresh in his consciousness. Divine restrictions governed not only his speech, but his entire mission. Celebration seemed premature when the outcome remained uncertain. Balak used the dinner conversation to paint detailed pictures of Israel's threat to regional stability. He described their supernatural victories over established kingdoms. He emphasized the terror their approach had brought to peaceful populations. "They cover the face of the earth," he declared dramatically. "No army can stand against them. No city walls can contain them. They devour everything in their path like locusts in harvest time." The other nobles nodded agreement, sharing their own observations of Israel's military prowess. Some had witnessed the aftermath of battles against Sihon and Og. Others had spoken with refugees who described scenes of total conquest. Balaam listened without comment to these accounts. He already understood Israel's strength came from divine backing rather than military superiority. Challenging such power would require more than human curses, no matter how skillfully crafted. As the evening progressed, Balak's expectations became increasingly explicit. He envisioned public ceremonies where Balaam would pronounce devastating curses upon Israel. He imagined their army collapsing in confusion and terror. He pictured himself as the king who had saved the region from Hebrew conquest. "Your reputation for effective cursing precedes you," Balak said meaningfully. "Kings throughout the land speak of enemies who withered before your words. Surely Israel will prove no more resistant than others who have faced your power." The flattery rang hollow in Balaam's ears. He had indeed spoken effective curses in the past, but always with divine authorization. This situation felt fundamentally different. The same God who had blessed Israel was now controlling his own speech. "I can promise only that I will speak the words given to me," Balaam replied carefully. "The source of those words lies beyond my control or yours." His qualification troubled some of the courtiers. They had expected confident assurances of victory. Instead, they heard cautious warnings about limitations and constraints. This didn't match their image of a prophet for hire, but Balak remained optimistic about the outcome. He had invested too much in this solution to entertain doubts now. Tomorrow would bring the cursing ceremonies that would save his kingdom. Tonight was for celebration and final preparations. As the feast wound down, servants escorted Balaam to luxurious guest quarters. Silk hangings adorned the walls. Comfortable furniture invited rest after his long journey. Oil lamps cast warm light that promised peaceful sleep. Yet sleep eluded the prophet as he contemplated the morning ahead. He understood his role in the coming drama, but not its ultimate outcome. Divine purposes remained hidden behind clouds of uncertainty. Outside his window, Moab's capital settled into nighttime quiet. Guards walked their appointed rounds along the walls. Citizens retired to their homes, secure in their belief that salvation had arrived in the form of a northern prophet. But Balaam knew the situation was far more complex than anyone imagined. He had come to Moab carrying divine restrictions that might shatter royal expectations. The words he would speak tomorrow could determine the fate of nations. The comfortable bed and luxurious surroundings couldn't ease his troubled thoughts. Somewhere beyond the eastern walls, Israel continued their relentless approach. Soon he would stand before them as Moab's spiritual champion, armed only with whatever words God chose to place in his mouth. The reunion with his donkey would have to wait until morning. But the animal's wisdom continued echoing in his consciousness. Sometimes the most faithful servants were those who refused to obey commands that led toward destruction. Tomorrow would test whether Balaam had learned the lessons his donkey had tried to teach him on the road to Moab. The talking animal had saved his life through apparent disobedience. Perhaps he too would need to disappoint earthly masters in order to serve heavenly purposes. The night deepened around the royal city. But dawn would bring the first of many surprises for King Balak and his desperate kingdom. The prophet they had hired to curse their enemies was about to demonstrate that divine purposes rarely aligned with human expectations. The first oracle dawn painted the eastern sky with soft pastels as King Balak led his royal procession toward the high places of Baal. The king had chosen this sacred site with careful deliberation. Ancient tradition held that curses spoken from such elevated positions carried greater power than those uttered at ground level. Balaam rode beside the monarch, his expression thoughtful and withdrawn. The night had brought him little rest as he wrestled with the implications of his mission. Divine restrictions weighed upon him like invisible chains, limiting his freedom while expanding his responsibility. The procession included Moab's highest officials and most influential priests. Their presence would lend ceremonial weight to the cursing ritual. When word spread of Israel's supernatural defeat, these witnesses would verify the authenticity of Balaam's performance. 7 altars had been prepared according to Balaam's specifications. The number carried sacred significance throughout the ancient world. 7 bulls and 7 rams awaited sacrifice, their selection following precise ritual requirements that the prophet had learned during his years of study. The hilltop commanded magnificent views across the surrounding landscape. To the east, Israel's encampment stretched like a vast city of tents. Smoke from thousands of cooking fires created a haze that softened the morning light. The sight of so many people gathered in one place struck awe into Moabite hearts. "From here you can see them all," Balak declared with satisfaction. "Every tent, every banner, every sign of their presence in our land. Curse them thoroughly from this vantage point, and their power will crumble like clay in the rain." Balaam nodded without enthusiasm. He understood the king's logic but doubted its effectiveness. Geography had little bearing on divine communication. God's voice reached him equally well from palaces or wilderness camps, mountaintops or valley floors. The sacrificial ritual began with solemn ceremony. Priests moved through prescribed actions with practiced precision. Incense burned on each altar, sending fragrant smoke toward heaven. Blood was sprinkled according to ancient formulas designed to attract divine attention. Throughout these preparations, Balaam remained unusually quiet. His normal practice involved extensive consultation with omens and signs. He would examine animal entrails for hidden messages. He would interpret the patterns of rising smoke. He would seek divine guidance through multiple channels. But this morning felt different. The divine voice that had spoken so clearly on the road to Moab remained silent during the ritual preparations. No visions appeared to guide his words. No supernatural insights illuminated his understanding of the situation. "I will go aside," Balaam finally announced. Perhaps the Lord will come to meet me. Whatever he shows me, I will tell you. He withdrew to a solitary place beyond earshot of the assembled crowd. Here, away from royal expectations and political pressures, he sought direct communication with the divine source of his prophetic abilities. The response came with startling immediacy. A vision filled his consciousness with images more vivid than physical sight. He saw Israel not as Balak viewed them, a threatening horde of invaders, but as God perceived them, a chosen people fulfilling divine destiny. Words began forming in his mind, but not the words anyone expected to hear. Instead of curses designed to weaken Israel, he found himself composing blessings that would strengthen their resolve and confirm their divine calling. The transformation was so complete that Balaam hardly recognized his own thoughts. The man who had traveled south to serve Moabite interests was becoming a mouthpiece for Israel's God. His professional loyalty was being redirected toward purposes he had never anticipated. When he returned to the waiting crowd, his demeanor had changed dramatically. Gone was the uncertain prophet who had arrived the night before. In his place stood a man filled with supernatural authority, his eyes bright with prophetic fire. "What have you done to me?" he began, his voice carrying clearly across the hilltop. "I took you to curse my enemies, and look, you have blessed them." The words struck the assembled Moabites like physical blows. This wasn't the opening they had expected from their expensive spiritual weapon. Balaam was addressing Balak as if the king had somehow tricked him into blessing Israel. But the prophet wasn't finished. Divine inspiration filled him with words that flowed like water from a spring. He couldn't stop the flood of blessing, even if he wanted to escape its consequences. "From Aram Balak has brought me, the king of Moab from the eastern mountains. Come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel. How shall I curse whom God has not cursed, or how shall I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced?" The rhetorical questions hung in the air like accusations. Balaam was explaining his inability to fulfill Balak's commission in terms that highlighted divine opposition to the king's plans. "For from the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him. Look, a people dwelling alone, not reckoning itself among the nations." The description painted Israel as unique among earth's peoples, set apart by divine choice, protected by supernatural covenant, beyond the reach of ordinary human manipulation or magical intervention. "Who can count the dust of Jacob or number 1/4 of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my end be like his." This final blessing was perhaps the most devastating of all. Balaam was expressing personal desire to share Israel's spiritual condition. He wanted to die as they would die, in divine favor rather than under divine judgment. The silence that followed his oracle was deafening. Every person on that hilltop understood that something extraordinary had occurred. The prophet hired to curse Israel had instead pronounced some of the most beautiful blessings in ancient literature. King Balak's face cycled through multiple emotions. Confusion gave way to anger. Anger yielded to desperation. Desperation collapsed into something approaching panic. Everything he had planned was unraveling before his eyes. "What have you done to me?" he demanded, his voice thick with accusation. "I brought you to curse my enemies, and you have blessed them instead." Balaam met the king's fury with calm authority. The divine inspiration that had filled him with Israel's blessings now sustained him against human wrath. He felt no obligation to apologize for speaking truth. "Must I not take heed to speak what the Lord has put in my mouth?" he replied simply. The answer contained both explanation and warning. Balaam was acknowledging divine control over his speech, while reminding Balak that fighting God's will was futile. The assembled nobles shifted uncomfortably as tension crackled between prophet and king. Their carefully planned solution to the Israel problem had not merely failed, it had backfired spectacularly. They now had public testimony to Israel's divine favor from their own hired expert. Some began whispering among themselves about alternative strategies. Perhaps military solutions deserved reconsideration. Maybe diplomatic approaches could succeed where spiritual ones had failed. The prophet's blessing of Israel had eliminated their most promising option. But Balak wasn't ready to accept defeat. Desperation bred stubborn persistence in his character. If one cursing ceremony had failed, perhaps another would succeed. Different location, modified approach, enhanced ritual, something might break through Balaam's apparent inability to curse Israel. The morning sun climbed higher as the first oracle concluded. The 7 altars continued burning, their smoke rising like prayers toward heaven. But the prayers were no longer Moabite petitions for victory. They had become involuntary offerings accompanying Israel's blessing. Balaam stood quietly among the disappointed officials, his prophetic duty fulfilled for the moment. He had spoken the words given to him regardless of their impact on his reputation or future prospects. The divine commission had overruled all human considerations. The road back to the capital stretched before them, but Balak showed no signs of dismissing his prophet. The king's mind was already working on modifications to his strategy. If Balaam couldn't curse Israel from this location, perhaps another site would prove more conducive to the desired outcome. Hope died hard in desperate hearts. The first oracle had ended, but the drama was far from finished. 3 more encounters awaited these 2 men, each building toward a climax that would surprise everyone involved. The prophet who had blessed Israel once was destined to do so again, with even greater power and clarity. As they descended from the high place of Baal, none of them realized they had witnessed the opening movement of a divine symphony. The music was just beginning, and its themes would echo through centuries of human history. The second attempt. King Balak's mind churned with desperate calculations as the royal procession wound its way down from the high place of Baal. The first cursing ceremony had failed completely, but failure only strengthened his resolve. Israel continued their relentless approach toward his borders. Each passing hour brought them closer to Moabite territory. The king convinced himself that location had determined the morning's outcome. Perhaps the high place of Baal carried associations that worked against his purposes. Different sacred sites might prove more conducive to effective cursing. Geography could be the key to success. "Come with me to another place," he said to Balaam as they reached level ground. "From there you may see them, though you shall see only the nearest of them and not see them all. Curse them for me from there." The logic seemed sound to Balak's anxious thinking. Overwhelming visual evidence of Israel's numbers might have intimidated his prophet. A partial view could reduce psychological pressure while maintaining sufficient target identification for cursing purposes. Balaam listened to these plans without enthusiasm. He understood that changing locations wouldn't alter divine intentions. The same God who had controlled his words on the first hilltop would govern his speech wherever they traveled next. Yet he offered no resistance to the king's proposal. His role was to serve as a conduit for divine communication, not to educate monarchs about spiritual realities. If Balak wanted to attempt another cursing ceremony, Balaam would participate faithfully. The second sacred site lay several miles south of the first. Known as the Field of Zophim, it occupied the peak of Mount Pisgah. Ancient tradition held that this location offered special access to divine revelation. Prophets and seers had sought visions here for countless generations. The journey gave Balak time to refine his strategy. Perhaps the morning's ritual had been inadequate in scope or intensity. More altars might demonstrate greater devotion to the cursing project. Enhanced sacrifices could attract more favorable divine attention. "Prepare 7 altars here also," he commanded when they reached the summit. "Provide 7 bulls and 7 rams for sacrifice. We will approach this task with even greater ceremony than before." The repetition of 7s reflected Balak's superstitious nature. If 7 altars had failed to produce curses, perhaps the same number might succeed in a different location. Sacred mathematics would surely influence supernatural outcomes. Moabite priests hurried to comply with royal orders. They constructed new altars according to precise specifications. They selected animals that met the highest standards for ritual purity. They gathered incense and sacred oils required for proper ceremonies. The Field of Zophim provided different views of Israel's encampment. From this angle, the Hebrew camp appeared smaller and less overwhelming. Individual sections could be distinguished rather than seeing one vast sea of tents. The psychological impact was indeed less intimidating. Balaam supervised the sacrificial preparations with professional competence. His years of experience had taught him the importance of proper ritual technique. Even when divine purposes conflicted with human expectations, ceremonies should be conducted with appropriate reverence. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as smoke from 7 altars rose toward cloudless skies. The smell of burning flesh mixed with incense created an atmosphere thick with religious significance. Everything possible was being done to ensure supernatural cooperation. Yet Balaam felt the same divine constraint that had governed his morning performance. No amount of ritual elaboration could change the fundamental reality of his situation. He remained bound to speak only words that God placed in his mouth. "Stay here by your burnt offering," he told Balak. "I will meet with the Lord over there." He withdrew once again to seek private divine communication. The hilltop ceremony proceeded according to ancient patterns, but his heart knew that location changes and ritual modifications couldn't alter spiritual realities. The divine response came with the same immediacy he had experienced that morning. Visions filled his consciousness with images of Israel's blessed condition. Words formed in his mind that would further frustrate Moabite expectations while confirming Hebrew destiny. When he returned to the waiting crowd, prophetic authority blazed in his eyes once more. The assembled nobles recognized the signs of genuine inspiration. Whatever message he carried would come directly from supernatural sources. "Rise up, Balak, and hear," he began with commanding presence. "Listen to me, son of Zippor. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Has he said, and will he not do? Or has he spoken, and will he not make it good?" These opening words struck at the heart of Balak's strategy. The king had hoped that divine intentions regarding Israel might prove changeable. Perhaps supernatural support for the Hebrew cause could be weakened through proper spiritual manipulation. But Balaam's oracle declared such hopes to be fundamentally misguided. Divine purposes possessed stability that exceeded human understanding. What God had determined regarding Israel's destiny would certainly come to pass. "Behold, I have received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot reverse it." The prophet was explaining his inability to curse Israel in terms that left no room for misunderstanding. Divine blessing upon the Hebrew people had been established beyond human power to alter or reverse. "He has not observed iniquity in Jacob, nor has he seen wickedness in Israel. The Lord his God is with him, and the shout of a king is among them." This description of Israel's spiritual condition contradicted everything Balak wanted to hear. Far from being vulnerable to supernatural attack, the Hebrew people enjoyed divine protection of the highest order. Their God dwelt among them as their sovereign ruler. God brings them out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox. For there is no sorcery against Jacob, nor any divination against Israel. It now must be said of Jacob and of Israel, "Oh, what God has done." The implications for Balak's situation were devastating. Not only would cursing Israel prove impossible, but their divine protection extended specifically to magical and supernatural attacks. Sorcery and divination, the very tools Balak was employing, had no power against these people. "Look, a people rises like a lioness and lifts itself up like a lion. It shall not lie down until it devours the prey and drinks the blood of the slain." The final image painted Israel as a predatory force that would consume its enemies completely. Far from being weakened by Balaam's words, they were being declared invincible in their divine calling as conquerors. The silence following this second oracle was even more profound than after the first. Every person present understood that Balaam had not merely failed to curse Israel again, he had blessed them with even greater power and authority. King Balak's face reflected the collapse of his last desperate hope. 2 separate attempts at supernatural warfare had backfired completely. His expensive prophet was systematically dismantling Moabite confidence while strengthening Hebrew resolve. Neither curse them at all nor bless them at all, the king finally exploded in frustration. The demand revealed Balak's complete misunderstanding of prophetic calling. He was treating Balaam like a hired entertainer who could modify his performance to suit audience preferences. The reality of divine constraint meant nothing to his desperate calculations. Balaam met royal anger with patient explanation. "Did I not tell you, saying, 'All that the Lord speaks that I must do'?" The reminder carried gentle reproach for the king's unrealistic expectations. Balaam had warned from the beginning that his words would be controlled by divine will rather than human desire. The morning's experience should have confirmed this limitation. But Balak refused to accept defeat. His kingdom's survival depended on finding some way to neutralize Israel's supernatural advantages. If two cursing ceremonies had failed, perhaps a third would succeed through different circumstances or modified approaches. The afternoon sun continued its westward journey as the second oracle concluded. 7 more altars had burned in vain. Another hilltop had witnessed Israel's blessing rather than their cursing. Divine purposes remained unchanged despite human manipulation attempts. Balaam stood quietly among the frustrated officials, his prophetic duty fulfilled once again. He had spoken truth regardless of its political consequences. Divine authority had overruled royal expectations with absolute finality, yet he sensed that more encounters lay ahead. Desperate kings rarely abandoned their strategies after only 2 failures. Balak would likely attempt a third cursing ceremony, perhaps from yet another location with different ritual modifications. The prophet who had blessed Israel twice was prepared to do so again if circumstances required. His mouth belonged to God now, not to earthly patrons who sought to purchase divine cooperation with gold and ceremony. As the royal procession prepared for descent from Mount Pisgah, none of them realized they were participants in a drama whose outcome had been determined before their first meeting. The blessings pronounced over Israel would echo through generations, while the curses Balak sought would never find their voice. The second attempt had ended like the first, with frustrated human ambition yielding to immutable divine will. But the story was far from finished. One more encounter awaited these 2 men, and it would surpass both previous oracles in power and prophetic scope. The third oracle, Balak's desperation grows with each sunrise. 2 attempts have failed. 2 blessings have flowed from Balaam's lips where curses should have fallen. The Moabite king feels time slipping through his fingers like desert sand. Israel camps below, their numbers vast as stars, their presence a shadow over his kingdom's future. The king leads Balaam to yet another high place. This time he chooses Mount Peor, a sacred site where Baal's presence was said to dwell strongest. The mountain overlooks the wilderness where Israel spreads their tents. From this height, the full scope of the Hebrew nation becomes visible. Campfires dot the landscape like earthbound constellations. The sight should inspire fear, should fuel the curse Balak desperately needs. But something shifts in Balaam as he gazes down. The Spirit of God settles upon him with unusual weight. His previous oracles came through divine compulsion, words forced from reluctant lips. Now the prophecy flows differently. Balaam's resistance melts away, his voice takes on new authority, deeper resonance. The third oracle begins with imagery that makes Balak's blood run cold. Balaam speaks of Israel as a garden by the river, as cedar trees beside the waters. These desert wanderers, Balaam declares, will flourish like well-watered plants. Their tents stretch beautiful across the valley. Their kingdom will rise higher than Agag. Their dominion will expand beyond the horizon. The prophecy grows more specific, more threatening to Moab's interests. Water will flow from Israel's buckets. Their seed will find rich soil wherever they plant it. Their king will tower above earthly rulers. God brought them from Egypt like a wild ox emerging from the wilderness. This same God will consume their enemies. Israel will break the bones of nations. They will pierce through with arrows those who stand against them. Balaam's voice carries across the mountain like thunder. He declares Israel will crouch like a lion, will rest like a lioness. Who dares disturb their slumber? The blessing follows ancient patterns. Those who bless Israel receive blessing in return. Those who curse Israel face divine judgment. But the words carry fresh power, immediate application to Balak's situation. The king's face darkens with each phrase. This oracle surpasses the previous 2 in its lavish praise of Israel. Balaam shows no sign of the internal struggle that marked his earlier prophecies. Instead, he speaks with flowing confidence, as though channeling heaven's own perspective on the Hebrew nation below. When the oracle ends, silence hangs over the mountain. Balak's anger finally erupts. He strikes his hands together, a gesture of complete rejection. 3 times he brought Balaam to curse his enemies. 3 times Balaam blessed them instead. The king's voice shakes with rage as he banishes the prophet. Flee to your place, he commands. Return home immediately. I planned to honor you greatly, but your God has kept you from advancement. Balaam responds with calm dignity. He reminds Balak of his consistent warning from the beginning. Even if the king offered his palace filled with silver and gold, the prophet could not go beyond what the Lord commands. Every word must align with divine will. Balaam cannot manufacture curses where God intends blessing. He cannot speak evil where heaven declares good. The third oracle marks a turning point in their relationship. Balak realizes his mission has completely failed. No amount of ritual, no change of location, no increased offerings can alter the fundamental reality. Israel carries heaven's favor. Moab faces a blessed nation, not a cursed wandering tribe. The king's political calculations crumble before prophetic declaration. For Balaam, this oracle represents both triumph and tragedy. He speaks God's words with unprecedented clarity and power. Yet each blessing he pronounces for Israel distances him further from earthly reward. His obedience costs him royal favor, monetary gain, political influence. The prophet who could command kings finds himself dismissed, sent away empty-handed. The mountain setting adds weight to these words. From Peor's heights, the full scope of both nations becomes visible. Israel spreads across the wilderness floor, blessed and multiplying. Moab huddles in its borders, fearful and seeking supernatural assistance against the inevitable. Geography itself seems to confirm the oracle's message. As the third blessing echoes across the landscape, both speaker and hearer understand they have reached a point of no return. Balak's hopes lie shattered. Balaam's role as royal advisor ends abruptly. The divine words hang in the air, unchangeable and absolute. Israel will indeed flourish like gardens by the river. Their enemies will fall before them like grain before the harvester's blade. The final word. Dawn breaks over Mount Peor as tension reaches its peak. Balak expects dismissal after his angry outburst. Balaam should gather his belongings and begin the long journey back to Pethor. Instead, the prophet remains standing on the sacred height. His eyes hold a distant look, as though seeing beyond the present moment into streams of time not yet unfolded. The king watches nervously as Balaam begins to speak again. This fourth oracle comes unsolicited, unpaid for, unexpected. No ritual preparation preceded it. No sacrificial smoke rises to invite divine presence. Yet the Spirit moves upon the prophet with greater force than before. His words carry the weight of absolute certainty. This final prophecy differs markedly from the previous three. Where earlier oracles focused on Israel's immediate blessing and prosperity, the fourth reaches deep into future centuries. Balaam speaks of distant days when a star will rise from Jacob, when a scepter will emerge from Israel. This coming ruler will crush the foreheads of Moab. He will break down all the sons of tumult and strife. The vision expands beyond Moab to encompass surrounding nations. Edom faces conquest. Seir falls under this future king's dominion. Israel will act with mighty power. From Jacob will come one who destroys survivors from the city. The scope of prophecy stretches across generations, revealing divine plans that extend far beyond current political struggles. Balaam's voice takes on an otherworldly quality as he describes this coming ruler. The star imagery evokes ancient royal symbolism, celestial signs that herald the rise of great kings. The scepter represents authority, righteous judgment, power to subdue enemies, and establish peace. This prophetic vision reaches towards something greater than mere tribal expansion or military conquest. The oracle continues with brief pronouncements about other nations. Amalek, that ancient enemy of Israel, will face ultimate destruction despite their current prominence among peoples. The Kenites, skilled metalworkers dwelling in rocky strongholds, will see their nests destroyed when Assyria takes them captive. Ships will come from the direction of Cyprus, afflicting both Assyria and Eber, though these naval powers too will perish. Each pronouncement adds layers to the prophetic landscape. Balaam sees the rise and fall of empires, the shifting of power between nations, the ultimate establishment of Israel's dominion over the region. His vision encompasses generations of conflict and resolution, conquest and liberation, judgment and restoration. Balak listens with growing unease. These prophecies spell doom for his kingdom and neighboring peoples. The future king from Israel will not merely defend against Moabite attacks, but will actively subjugate Moab. The blessing Balaam pronounced over Israel in previous oracles now reveals its full implications. A blessed nation will become a conquering nation. The fourth oracle demonstrates prophetic sight operating at its highest level. Balaam no longer struggles between divine compulsion and personal desire. His resistance has completely dissolved. The Spirit flows through him unobstructed, revealing truths that transcend immediate circumstances. He becomes pure vessel for divine revelation. When the oracle concludes, profound silence settles over the mountain. The weight of destiny hangs heavy in the morning air. Balak has heard not just his nation's defeat, but its future subjugation. The immediate threat of Israel's presence pales beside the prophecy of coming conquest. His kingdom's days of independence are numbered, measured in generations rather than years. Balaam's transformation appears complete. The prophet who arrived reluctantly, who required divine intervention through a speaking donkey, now delivers unsolicited prophecy with commanding authority. His evolution from resistant seer to willing vessel reaches its climax in this spontaneous fourth oracle. Yet questions linger beneath the prophetic triumph. How will Balaam respond to his dismissal? Will he accept the loss of royal favor and return quietly to Mesopotamia? The intensity of his prophetic experience contrasts sharply with his sudden fall from political grace. The man who speaks for God finds himself rejected by earthly rulers. The mountain setting amplifies the oracle's significance. From Peor's heights, Balaam's vision encompasses not just the valley below, but distant centuries ahead. The elevated perspective becomes metaphor for prophetic sight that transcends normal human limitations. The sacred mountain witnesses words that will echo through history. As the fourth oracle fades, both king and prophet face uncertain futures. Balak must prepare his kingdom for prophesied conquest. Balaam must navigate the consequences of speaking divine truth to unwilling ears. The star from Jacob rises in prophetic vision, while its earthly implications cast long shadows over present realities. Balaam's exit. The awkward silence stretches between king and prophet. Balak's anger has cooled into grim resignation. His grand plan to curse Israel lies in ruins, replaced by lavish blessings and terrifying prophecies of future conquest. The money promised to Balaam remains unspent. The royal honors planned for the successful sorcerer turn to empty gestures. Balaam gathers his few possessions with quiet dignity. His servants load pack animals for the long journey back to Pethor. The prophet who arrived with such hope for advancement now prepares to leave empty-handed. His reputation as a seer remains intact, perhaps even enhanced, but his dreams of wealth and political influence crumble like clay in the desert heat. The parting between Balak and Balaam carries undertones of mutual disappointment. The king expected supernatural assistance against Israel's advance. Instead, he received divine confirmation of his worst fears. The prophet anticipated rich rewards for his mystical services. Instead, he experiences the cost of absolute obedience to divine will. As Balaam's caravan departs from Moab, the text suggests his story should end here. The reluctant prophet returns home, chastened by his encounter with Israel's God. The talking donkey episode serves as a humorous but pointed reminder of divine sovereignty over human ambition. The four oracles stand as testimony to God's blessing upon the chosen people. But this apparent conclusion conceals deeper currents. The biblical narrative only hints at what follows Balaam's departure. Later texts reveal that his story takes darker turns, that his exit from Balak's presence does not mark the end of his involvement with Israel and Moab. The prophet's journey home becomes a journey toward tragedy. The road back to Mesopotamia stretches long and dusty before Balaam's caravan. Days of travel provide ample time for reflection on recent events. The prophet who spoke with God, who delivered four powerful oracles, who experienced divine visions, now faces the mundane reality of personal failure. His supernatural gifts brought him no earthly success. During this journey, something shifts within Balaam's heart. The exact timing remains unclear, but seeds of resentment begin to grow. Perhaps the long miles breed bitterness over lost opportunities. Maybe the prophet's pride rebels against dismissal despite faithful service. The man who blessed Israel begins to contemplate ways to harm them indirectly. The biblical text maintains strategic silence about Balaam's activities immediately following his departure from Balak. This narrative gap creates space for speculation about the prophet's mental and spiritual state. His outward compliance with divine commands may have masked inner rebellion that now surfaces during solitary travel. What we know for certain is that Balaam's story does not end with his dignified exit from Moab. The prophet who could not curse Israel directly will find indirect means to bring calamity upon them. His failure to earn Balak's gold will lead him to seek other forms of compensation. The man touched by divine spirit will yield to human corruption. The irony deepens when we consider Balaam's unique position. Few people in biblical history receive such direct divine communication. God speaks to him clearly, guides him explicitly, uses him as prophetic vessel for crucial oracles. Yet this privilege becomes burden rather than blessing. The closer Balaam draws to divine truth, the farther he drifts from personal satisfaction. His departure from Moab represents a crossroads moment, though its significance only becomes apparent later. The prophet faces a choice between accepting his role as God's spokesman with all its limitations and costs, or seeking alternative paths to achievement and reward. The road stretching before him becomes metaphor for moral decision that will define his ultimate legacy. Balak watches the caravan disappear into desert distance with mixed emotions. Relief mingles with frustration in the king's heart. The troublesome prophet departs, ending an uncomfortable episode. Yet the oracles remain, their words hanging over Moab like storm clouds. The blessings pronounced over Israel cannot be recalled or reversed. For Israel, camped in the plains below, Balaam's exit should signal safety from supernatural threat. The enemy's attempt to secure divine assistance has failed spectacularly. Their God has turned curses into blessings, made their adversary's seer into their unwitting advocate. Victory appears complete and decisive, but the appearance deceives. Balaam's physical departure from the scene does not end his influence on events. The prophet carries with him knowledge gained during his time in Moab, understanding of both nations' weaknesses and strengths. His exit marks not conclusion, but transition to a different phase of the story. The dust settles on the road as Balaam's caravan fades from view. The immediate crisis passes. King and people return to their normal routines. Yet beneath the surface, calm new currents begin to flow. The prophet's apparent departure conceals his continued involvement in the unfolding drama between Israel and the nations surrounding them. Balaam in the ancient world. Archaeological discoveries in the 20th century shed unexpected light on Balaam's historical reality. In 1967, excavators working at Deir Allah in Jordan uncovered fragments of plaster inscriptions that mention a seer named Balaam, son of Beor. The discovery provides external confirmation that such a prophet existed beyond biblical narrative, anchoring the story in historical soil. The Deir Allah inscription, written in Aramaic and dating to around 850 to 750 BCE, describes Balaam receiving divine visions about coming disaster. The text presents him as a renowned seer, whose prophetic words carry weight among various people groups. Gods of different nations speak to him in dreams, revealing future calamities that will befall the land unless proper action is taken. This archaeological evidence transforms our understanding of Balaam's significance in the ancient Near East. Rather than being merely a character in Israelite literature, he appears to have been a well-known prophetic figure whose reputation extended across cultural and national boundaries. His fame as a seer reached levels that warranted permanent commemoration in plaster inscriptions. The inscription's portrayal of Balaam differs subtly from the biblical account while maintaining essential elements. Both sources present him as someone who receives divine visions, who speaks prophetic words that affect nations, who operates outside normal political structures. The Deir Allah text emphasizes his role as warner of impending judgment, messenger of divine displeasure with human behavior. These discoveries illuminate the broader world of ancient Near Eastern prophecy in which Balaam operated. Professional seers moved freely between kingdoms, offering their services to rulers seeking supernatural guidance. They functioned as international consultants, bringing divine perspective to political and military decisions. Their reputations could span generations and cross-cultural boundaries. The plaster inscription suggests Balaam's prophetic career continued long after his encounter with Balak and Israel. He remained active as a seer, receiving visions and delivering oracles about various nations' futures. His fame grew rather than diminished following the events described in Numbers. The prophet who failed to curse Israel successfully maintained his reputation in other contexts. The text from Deir Allah describes Balaam weeping when he receives a disturbing vision about divine judgment. The gods declare their intention to reverse the natural order, to bring darkness where light should reign, to destroy fertility and abundance. The seer's emotional response demonstrates the burden prophetic calling places upon those who receive divine revelations about coming disasters. This emotional dimension adds depth to our understanding of Balaam's character. The biblical narrative focuses primarily on his interactions with Balak and his oracles concerning Israel. The Deir Allah inscription reveals a prophet genuinely concerned about the welfare of peoples and nations, someone who grieves when shown visions of coming destruction. The archaeological evidence also provides insight into ancient prophetic techniques and practices. Balaam receives his visions during the night in dreams that carry divine authority. He shares these revelations with assemblies of people, presumably including local leaders and religious figures. The community takes his words seriously enough to record them permanently on plastered walls. The geography of Deir Allah, located in the Jordan Valley, not far from where biblical events unfold, supports the historical plausibility of Balaam's involvement in regional affairs. The site lies along ancient trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with Egypt and the Levantine coast. Prophets operating in this area would naturally encounter diverse peoples and political situations. The inscription's mention of various deities speaking to Balaam reflects the polytheistic religious environment of the ancient Near East. Unlike the biblical portrayal where Yahweh alone communicates with the prophet, the Deir Allah text presents him as receiving messages from multiple divine sources. This difference may reflect different stages in Balaam's career or varying perspectives on his prophetic role. The discovery at Deir Allah demonstrates that Balaam's story resonated beyond Israelite circles. His prophetic ministry left lasting impressions on various communities throughout the region. The investment required to create and maintain plaster inscriptions indicates that local people valued his oracles highly enough to preserve them for future generations. This external confirmation of Balaam's existence and reputation helps explain why Balak specifically sought his services against Israel. The Moabite king was not grasping at random supernatural assistance, but deliberately engaging a prophet whose effectiveness was widely recognized. Balaam's fame as a successful seer made him the obvious choice for such a crucial undertaking. The archaeological evidence also raises intriguing questions about the relationship between the historical Balaam and the biblical portrayal. Both sources agree on his prophetic gifts and international reputation, but they differ in emphasis and detail. These variations suggest that Balaam's story was remembered and retold by different communities for different purposes. The Deir Allah inscription provides a window into how ancient peoples understood and commemorated prophetic ministry. They saw seers like Balaam as bridges between divine and human realms, as interpreters of heavenly will for earthly communities. Their words carried authority that transcended political boundaries and cultural differences. Ancient divination and magic. The ancient Near East pulsed with supernatural activity that modern minds struggle to comprehend. Divination was not superstition, but sophisticated technology for accessing hidden knowledge. Kings employed teams of specialists who read omens in everything from animal livers to celestial movements. The boundary between natural and supernatural remained fluid, permeable to divine intervention. Mesopotamian texts catalog hundreds of omens that trained diviners learned to interpret. The flight patterns of birds, the formations of oil on water, the shapes of smoke rising from sacrificial fires all carried messages from the gods. Professional readers spent years mastering these complex systems of supernatural communication. Their expertise commanded royal respect and generous compensation. Babylonian and Assyrian rulers rarely made important decisions without consulting multiple forms of divination. Military campaigns, diplomatic initiatives, construction projects, even personal matters required divine approval, obtained through proper channels. The practice was so institutionalized that palace archives contain detailed records of omens and their interpretations stretching across centuries. The phenomenon of speaking animals, while unusual, fits within this broader supernatural framework. Ancient literature contains numerous accounts of creatures delivering divine messages to humans. Egyptian texts describe sacred animals conveying the will of gods. Mesopotamian stories feature beasts that warn of coming disasters or reveal hidden truths. Balaam's talking donkey, therefore, represents not isolated miracle, but participation in recognized patterns of divine communication. Prophetic ecstasy was another well-documented aspect of ancient religious practice. Seers entered altered states of consciousness through various means, including music, dance, incense, fasting, and ritual preparation. In these trance-like conditions, they received visions and heard divine voices that normal awareness could not access. The process was understood as temporary possession by divine spirits. The practice of hiring foreign prophets like Balaam reflects ancient understanding that divine knowledge transcended national boundaries. Gods of different peoples might communicate through any suitable vessel. A Mesopotamian prophet could potentially access deities worshipped in Canaan or Egypt. This theological flexibility allowed rulers to cast wide nets when seeking supernatural assistance. Ancient texts distinguish between different types of supernatural practitioners. Some functioned primarily as diviners, reading signs and omens to predict future events. Others specialized in magic, attempting to manipulate supernatural forces for specific outcomes. Still others served as prophets, receiving and delivering direct divine messages. Balaam appears to have combined elements from all three categories. The technology of cursing was highly developed in the ancient world. Professional curse makers created elaborate rituals designed to bring misfortune upon enemies. These ceremonies often involved symbolic actions, incantations, and the creation of objects that embodied the curse's power. Kings regularly employed such specialists against military opponents or political rivals. Conversely, the power to bless was equally valued and feared. Prophetic blessings were understood to release supernatural forces that could transform entire nations' destinies. The words themselves carried inherent power that operated independently of the speaker's intentions. Once pronounced, blessings and curses took on lives of their own, working their effects across time and space. Ancient peoples understood that supernatural power could be both creative and destructive, beneficial and harmful. The same forces that brought fertility to crops could cause drought and famine. Divine favor that elevated one king might simultaneously destroy his enemies. This dual nature of supernatural power required careful handling by trained specialists. The concept of divine sovereignty over prophetic speech appears throughout ancient Near Eastern literature. Gods were understood to control what their chosen messengers could say. Even the most skilled prophet could not force divine beings to reveal information they wished to keep hidden or to pronounce words that contradicted divine will. This understanding helps explain Balaam's inability to curse Israel, despite his own desires, and Balak's expectations. Rituals of divination often required elaborate preparation and specific locations: mountaintops, sacred groves, temple complexes, and other sites were believed to facilitate divine communication. The physical environment affected the quality and clarity of supernatural revelations. Balaam's movement between different high places reflects this ancient understanding of geography's role in prophetic practice. The international nature of ancient divination created networks of professional seers who shared techniques and knowledge across cultural boundaries. These specialists formed informal guilds that transcended national loyalties. A prophet's reputation for accuracy and effectiveness could spread rapidly through these networks, explaining how Balaam's fame reached distant Moab. Ancient texts also reveal the psychological and spiritual costs of prophetic calling. Seers frequently describe the burden of receiving divine visions, especially when those revelations concern judgment and destruction. The emotional toll of serving as messenger for often unwelcome divine truths appears throughout ancient literature. Prophets were honored but rarely envied. The practice of dream interpretation was closely related to prophecy in ancient thinking. Divine beings commonly communicated through dreams and visions that required skilled interpretation. Professional dream readers developed sophisticated techniques for understanding symbolic imagery and hidden meanings. Night visions were considered particularly reliable forms of divine communication. Magic and divination were not considered opposed to religion, but integral parts of it. The same priests who conducted temple sacrifices often served as diviners and magical practitioners. Supernatural power was understood as emanating from divine sources, making its various manifestations equally legitimate. The categories that modern minds use to separate religion, magic, and science did not exist in ancient thinking. This rich supernatural environment helps explain both the acceptance of Balaam's prophetic claims and the shock when his words consistently favored Israel over Moab. Ancient peoples expected prophets to deliver whatever messages the gods provided, regardless of human preferences. The surprise lay not in divine communication itself, but in its unexpected content and consistent direction. Who was Balaam really speaking to? The question haunts every reader of Balaam's story. Which divine being actually communicated with the Mesopotamian prophet? The text consistently refers to interactions with God and the Lord, using Hebrew names for Israel's deity. Yet Balaam operated within a polytheistic framework where multiple gods competed for human attention and allegiance. The theological implications ripple outward like stones cast into still water. From an Israelite perspective, the answer seems straightforward. Yahweh, the covenant God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, chose to speak through this foreign prophet to accomplish specific purposes. The Lord's sovereignty extends beyond Israel's borders, encompassing all nations and their religious practitioners. Even pagan seers must submit to divine authority when God decides to use them as prophetic vessels. This interpretation emphasizes divine transcendence over human religious categories. Yahweh can speak through anyone, anywhere, at any time. Balaam's foreign origins and polytheistic background present no obstacles to divine communication. The Lord uses this unlikely messenger to demonstrate power over all peoples and to accomplish purposes that serve Israel's ultimate blessing and prosperity. Yet careful readers notice subtle tensions within the narrative itself. Balaam refers to my God in ways that suggest personal relationship rather than reluctant submission to foreign deity. His prophetic techniques align with standard Mesopotamian practices. The elaborate ritual preparations on multiple mountaintops reflect divination methods familiar throughout the ancient Near East, rather than Israelite worship patterns. The Deir Allah inscription adds complexity to this theological puzzle. The external archaeological evidence presents Balaam receiving messages from gods in plural, suggesting ongoing relationships with multiple divine beings. This polytheistic framework differs markedly from the biblical portrayal where Yahweh alone communicates with the prophet. The historical Balaam may have operated within religious assumptions quite different from those reflected in Israelite literature. Some interpreters propose that Balaam genuinely worshipped El, the high god of the Canaanite pantheon, whom they identify with Yahweh under different cultural names. This theory suggests theological continuity beneath surface differences. The prophet was not converting to foreign religion, but encountering the same divine reality through familiar cultural categories. His surprise at being unable to curse Israel reflected genuine shock at discovering where his God's loyalties actually lay. Another perspective suggests that Balaam practiced a form of theological opportunism common among ancient diviners. Professional seers often claimed ability to commune with whatever gods their clients preferred. When Balak sought supernatural assistance against Israel, Balaam attempted to access the divine beings most likely to provide effective help. His repeated failures indicated that Israel's God had blocked other supernatural channels. The theological question becomes more complex when we consider Balaam's apparent ability to receive genuine divine revelation mixed with personal moral compromise. The New Testament writers clearly consider him a negative example, someone who used spiritual gifts for selfish gain. Yet the oracles he delivered contain some of the Hebrew Bible's most beautiful and powerful prophecies about Israel's destiny. This paradox challenges simple categories about prophetic authenticity. Can someone speak true words from God while harboring corrupt motivations? The biblical evidence suggests that divine communication can occur through flawed vessels without endorsing their character or approving their methods. Balaam's prophecies carry divine authority despite his personal failings. The narrative structure itself provides clues about the theological dynamics at work. God initially forbids Balaam to go with Balak's messengers, then grants permission with strict conditions. This divine change of mind suggests ongoing negotiation between heavenly will and human agency. The Lord adapts strategies to accomplish purposes while allowing genuine choice and responsibility. The angel who blocks Balaam's path represents another layer of divine involvement. This heavenly messenger appears to oppose the journey that God has apparently approved. The incident suggests internal divine complexity, different aspects of heavenly will operating simultaneously. The prophet finds himself caught between competing divine signals that require careful discernment. The donkey's role in revealing the angel adds further theological depth. An ordinary animal perceives supernatural reality that the professional prophet cannot see. This reversal emphasizes divine sovereignty over human expertise. God can reveal truth through any creature while concealing it from those who claim special spiritual insight. The incident humbles prophetic pretension while demonstrating heavenly accessibility. When Balaam finally delivers his oracles, the content clearly serves Israel's interests rather than Moab's political needs. The blessings flow freely and abundantly, painting pictures of future prosperity and dominion that directly contradict what Balak hoped to hear. These prophecies align perfectly with covenant promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob about their descendants' ultimate destiny. The fourth oracle's focus on a future ruler emerging from Israel provides particularly strong evidence of Yahweh's involvement. This messianic prophecy connects directly to promises woven throughout Hebrew scripture about coming deliverance and divine kingdom establishment. No foreign god would likely communicate such specifically Israelite hopes and expectations. Yet, questions remain about Balaam's understanding of what was happening to him. Did he recognize that Israel's God was speaking through him? Did he comprehend the theological implications of his inability to curse the chosen people? The text provides few clues about the prophet's internal spiritual awareness during these crucial encounters. The tension between divine sovereignty and prophetic agency creates ongoing interpretive challenges. If God completely controlled Balaam's words, how can the prophet bear responsibility for later actions that bring divine judgment? If Balaam retained freedom to choose his responses, how do we explain his complete inability to curse Israel despite strong personal and financial incentives? These theological questions have no easy answers. The narrative presents divine mystery that exceeds human comprehension. God works through flawed people to accomplish perfect purposes. Truth emerges from unlikely sources. Blessing flows through resistant vessels. The story invites wonder rather than demanding systematic explanation of how such things can be. The Israelite camp. While Balaam prophesies from distant mountains, daily life continues in Israel's sprawling encampment below. The rhythms of wilderness existence have become familiar after 4 decades of wandering. Tents cluster around tribal standards, creating neighborhoods that mirror the social structure revealed at Sinai. Families wake at dawn to tend flocks, prepare meals, and maintain their temporary dwellings in the harsh desert environment. The camp stretches across the plains of Moab like a temporary city. Estimates suggest that 600,000 fighting men, plus their families, would create a community of perhaps 2 million souls. The logistics of feeding, watering, and organizing such numbers staggers the imagination. Yet the community functions with remarkable order, guided by divine instructions and experienced leadership developed during long years of migration. At the camp's center stands the tabernacle, that portable sanctuary where heaven meets earth. The golden ark rests within the Holy of Holies, symbol of God's presence among the people. Priests conduct daily sacrifices while Levites maintain the sacred structure and its furnishings. Smoke rises continually from the bronze altar, carrying the people's prayers and offerings toward heaven. The 12 tribes arrange themselves around the tabernacle according to divine command. Each group maintains its distinct identity while participating in the larger community. Genealogies matter deeply here, connecting families to ancestral promises and tribal territories awaiting them across the Jordan River. The elderly remember Egypt, while the young dream of the promised land stretching beyond the wilderness. Moses moves through the camp with the authority of one who speaks face to face with God. His words carry absolute weight in settling disputes, making military decisions, and interpreting divine law. Yet the burden of leadership shows in his aging frame. The man who led Israel out of Egypt knows he will not enter the promised land himself. His role is ending as a new generation prepares to inherit ancient promises. Joshua stands ready to assume military and political leadership. His experience in battle and his unwavering faith mark him as Moses' natural successor. The younger generation looks to him with hope, while veterans of the wilderness journey offer their experience and support. Transition approaches, bringing both opportunity and uncertainty about the future. The camp buzzes with anticipation about crossing into Canaan. Scouts have surveyed the land. Military preparations advance steadily. The people who once feared the giants dwelling beyond Jordan have grown in faith and confidence. Their children, born in the wilderness, possess courage their parents lacked when they first approached the Promised Land's borders 40 years earlier. Yet dangerous currents flow beneath the surface, calm. Extended exposure to foreign peoples and their religious practices has created subtle influences within the camp. Some Israelites show curiosity about neighboring customs and beliefs. The strict monotheism that defines their identity faces constant pressure from surrounding polytheistic cultures that seem more tolerant and inclusive. The generation that experienced slavery in Egypt has largely passed away during the wilderness years. Most adults now living grew up in the desert, shaped by miraculous provision and divine guidance. They know stories about Egyptian bondage, but lack personal memories of foreign oppression. Their relationship with God developed in freedom rather than desperation, creating different expectations and attitudes. Trade relationships with nearby peoples bring both blessing and temptation. Israel needs certain goods that only settled communities can provide. These commercial contacts create opportunities for cultural exchange that go beyond simple business transactions. Merchants carry ideas as well as merchandise, introducing foreign concepts that challenge traditional beliefs and practices. The camp's proximity to Moabite territory increases these pressures. Balak's people watch Israel with nervous fascination. Despite official hostility between the governments, ordinary citizens on both sides find common ground in daily concerns about survival, prosperity, and security. Informal contacts develop that transcend political boundaries. Young Israelite men, particularly those involved in trading or military activities, encounter Moabite women whose beauty and charm prove difficult to resist. These interactions begin innocently, but carry potential for deeper relationships that could compromise religious loyalty. The attraction operates in both directions, creating romantic possibilities that ignore tribal and theological differences. Religious festivals and seasonal celebrations provide additional opportunities for cultural mixing. Moabite agricultural ceremonies appeal to Israelites who anticipate their own transition from nomadic to settled life. The rituals seem relevant to farming challenges they will soon face, offering practical wisdom alongside spiritual practices that differ subtly from Mosaic traditions. The camp's religious leadership works diligently to maintain doctrinal purity while acknowledging practical realities of living among foreign peoples. Priests teach constantly about the dangers of syncretism, the temptation to blend Yahweh worship with elements borrowed from neighboring religions. Yet they also recognize that complete isolation is neither possible nor desirable for a people preparing to inherit a land populated by diverse communities. Elders remember the golden calf incident at Sinai, when the people created an idol during Moses' absence on the mountain. That catastrophe resulted in divine judgment that claimed thousands of lives. The memory serves as warning about the consequences of religious compromise, yet similar temptations resurface regularly in new forms. The tribal structure that provides social stability also creates potential divisions within the larger community. Each group maintains distinct customs and interests that sometimes conflict with collective welfare. Disputes over resources, territory, and leadership require constant mediation to prevent serious fragmentation. As Israel prepares for the conquest of Canaan, military training intensifies throughout the camp. Young men practice with weapons while veterans share tactical knowledge gained in battles against desert enemies. The community that began as escaped slaves transforms itself into an effective fighting force capable of claiming their ancestral inheritance. Yet military preparation alone cannot guarantee success in the challenges ahead. The people must maintain spiritual unity and religious faithfulness while adapting to radically different living conditions. The wilderness years provided unique education in trusting divine provision, but settled life will test their commitment in new ways. The camp represents a pivotal moment in Israel's history. The generation that will inherit the promised land gathers itself for the final phase of a journey that began with Abraham's call to leave Mesopotamia centuries earlier. Their choices in coming days will determine whether they fulfill divine purposes or repeat the failures of their predecessors who died in the wilderness. The aftermath in Moab. The days following Balaam's departure bring uneasy quiet to the Moabite royal court. King Balak retreats to his palace chambers, nursing the bitter taste of complete failure. His grand strategy to neutralize Israel through supernatural means has backfired spectacularly. Instead of curses, the hired prophet delivered blessings that seemed to guarantee Moabite defeat and subjugation. The king's advisors gather in hushed conferences, debating their next moves. Military options appear increasingly futile against a people whom heaven itself has blessed. Diplomatic solutions seem equally unlikely given the oracle's predictions of conquest and dominion. Moab faces a future that grows darker with each passing hour, as Israel's presence looms larger on the horizon. Court officials who witnessed Balaam's prophecies spread word throughout the kingdom. The star that will rise from Jacob, the scepter that will emerge from Israel, the ruler who will crush Moab's forehead, these images haunt the collective imagination. Citizens begin making private preparations for catastrophe they cannot prevent but hope to survive. Some Moabites propose immediate surrender, arguing that resistance against divinely blessed enemies is futile. Others advocate desperate military measures, suggesting that dying in battle surpasses living under foreign domination. The kingdom splits between those who accept their fate and those who refuse to yield without struggle. Religious leaders face their own crisis of confidence. The failure to secure supernatural assistance through Balaam raises uncomfortable questions about their God's power and willingness to protect devoted worshippers. If professional prophets cannot successfully curse Israel, what hope remains for divine intervention on Moab's behalf? The cult of Baal Peor, centered on the mountain where Balaam delivered his most devastating oracle, experiences particular upheaval. Priests who claimed special access to divine favor now struggle to explain their deity's apparent impotence. Worshippers question whether their sacrifices and rituals serve any meaningful purpose. Yet, within this theological confusion, new possibilities begin to emerge. Some Moabites start wondering whether Israel's God might accept their worship alongside or instead of traditional deities. The oracles suggest that Yahweh exercises power over all nations, like not just the Hebrews. Perhaps accommodation remains possible for those willing to acknowledge superior divine authority. These religious stirrings create opportunities that more perceptive political minds begin to recognize. If direct confrontation with Israel appears doomed to failure, perhaps indirect approaches might achieve better results. The enemy shows signs of internal tensions and moral vulnerabilities that skilled manipulation could exploit. Women emerge as potential instruments of such strategy. Moabite daughters possess beauty that could attract Israelite men across cultural and religious boundaries. Romantic relationships might accomplish what military force and supernatural cursing could not achieve. Hearts captured through love could lead to religious and political compromise. The plan develops gradually through whispered conversations and subtle suggestions, rather than formal royal decrees. Families living near Israel's camp receive gentle encouragement to allow their daughters greater freedom in socializing with foreign neighbors. Market activities expand to create more opportunities for casual interaction between young people from both communities. These initiatives proceed with careful attention to maintaining plausible denial. Official Moabite policy continues to treat Israel as potential enemy, while unofficial activities work to undermine Hebrew unity and religious commitment. The strategy requires patience and subtlety, qualities that desperation makes difficult to maintain. Meanwhile, refugees from other nations defeated by Israel's advance bring their own perspectives and suggestions. Midianite survivors share intelligence about Hebrew weaknesses and successful tactics used against them in previous encounters. These foreign voices add urgency to Moabite planning, while providing practical guidance for implementation. The emerging strategy focuses on exploiting Israel's transition from nomadic to settled life. The wilderness generation maintained strict religious discipline under Moses' direct leadership. But their children, preparing to inherit agricultural land, show greater interest in farming techniques and seasonal festivals practiced by established communities. Moabite religious practices offer attractive alternatives to Israelite austerity. Where Hebrew worship emphasizes divine transcendence and moral purity, Canaanite traditions celebrate fertility and abundance through rituals that engage bodily appetites and emotional desires. The contrast appeals to young people seeking more immediate and tangible spiritual experiences. The cult of Baal Peor adapts its practices to attract Hebrew participants. Temple prostitution, previously reserved for Moabite worshippers, becomes available to foreign visitors. Seasonal festivals welcome anyone interested in ensuring agricultural prosperity. The barriers between communities begin dissolving through shared religious experiences. Local leaders coordinate these efforts with remarkable skill, considering their desperation. Messages pass between villages and towns, synchronizing activities to maximize impact while minimizing detection by Israeli authorities. The campaign unfolds like a military operation disguised as cultural exchange. The first signs of success appear within weeks of Balaam's departure. Young Israelite men begin appearing at Moabite social gatherings and religious ceremonies. Initial contacts seem innocent enough: trade negotiations, social curiosity, romantic attraction. But each interaction creates opportunities for deeper influence and commitment. These developments occur beyond Balak's direct observation, but with his tacit approval. The king who failed to curse Israel through supernatural means now watches his people attempt to corrupt them through natural attractions. The strategy offers hope where military options provide only despair. The irony deepens when considered against Balaam's prophecies about Israel's future blessing and dominion. The very oracles that pronounced Moab's doom create conditions that make Hebrew corruption more likely. Desperation drives innovation, while prophecy provides motivation for increasingly bold attempts at subversion. As these activities intensify, the stage sets for moral catastrophe that will validate Balaam's warnings while temporarily obscuring his blessings. The prophet who could not curse Israel directly will witness them curse themselves through choices that invite divine judgment. The talking donkey's master will have the last word after all. The aftermath in Moab thus becomes prelude to crisis in Israel's camp. King Balak's failure to secure supernatural assistance transforms into his people's success at providing supernatural temptation. The blessed nation faces dangers that external enemies could not create, but internal compromise makes devastatingly possible. The sin of Peor. The corruption begins subtly, like morning mist that gradually thickens until it obscures the entire landscape. Young Israelite men, drawn by trade opportunities and social curiosity, find themselves increasingly welcome in Moabite communities. The initial commercial exchanges expand into friendly conversations, shared meals, and invitations to local celebrations that seem harmless enough on the surface. The attraction operates on multiple levels beyond simple romantic interest. After 40 years of wilderness wandering, these Hebrew youth hunger for experiences that settled life provides. Moabite festivals offer music, dancing, abundant food, and social pleasure that contrast sharply with the austere religious observances they have known since childhood. The forbidden fruit tastes especially sweet to those raised on strict dietary laws and moral discipline. Moabite women welcome these foreign visitors with carefully calculated charm. Their beauty dazzles men accustomed to the harsh desert environment where survival takes precedence over aesthetics. These daughters of settled communities possess sophistication and cultural knowledge that nomadic life rarely develops. They represent a world of comfort and pleasure that beckons like an oasis to desert travelers. The religious dimensions of Moabite hospitality unfold gradually, almost imperceptibly. What begins as social celebration slowly incorporates ritual elements that honor local deities. Baal Peor, the god of fertility and abundance, presides over ceremonies that promise agricultural prosperity and personal fulfillment. The worship seems practical rather than theological, offering tangible benefits rather than abstract spiritual principles. The cult's sexual practices present the greatest temptation for young men far from home and family oversight. Temple prostitution, justified as sacred ritual that ensures fertility of crops and herds, provides religious sanction for appetites that Israelite law strictly controls. The experience seems both spiritually meaningful and physically satisfying, a combination that proves irresistible to many participants. These religious encounters require explicit rejection of Yahweh's exclusive claims on Israel's worship and allegiance. Participants must acknowledge Baal Peor's authority over agricultural concerns while engaging in practices that directly violate fundamental commandments received at Sinai. The corruption thus involves conscious apostasy rather than mere moral weakness. The participation spreads through the Israelite camp like disease through a crowded population. Young men share their experiences with friends and relatives, describing the pleasures and benefits available just beyond the camp's boundaries. The temptation multiplies as social pressure combines with personal desire to draw more Hebrews into Moabite religious activities. Tribal leaders initially fail to recognize the seriousness of what is developing. The participants seem happy and confident rather than ashamed or troubled. They speak enthusiastically about their new Moabite friends and the practical benefits of learning agricultural techniques from experienced farmers. The religious components remain hidden beneath layers of social and economic justification. The corruption gains momentum as participants become advocates for broader cultural exchange. They argue that Israel's future prosperity depends on good relationships with neighboring peoples who possess knowledge essential for successful farming. The religious practices seem minor compared to practical benefits that integration with local communities could provide. Moses and the priestly leadership grow increasingly alarmed as reports reach them about Hebrew involvement in foreign religious activities. The elderly leader who brought Israel out of Egyptian bondage recognizes the pattern from previous crises. The people who worship golden calf at Sinai now risk similar apostasy through Canaanite fertility religion. The crisis deepens when participants begin bringing Moabite women into the Israelite camp itself. These relationships, initially casual and temporary, develop into serious commitments that threaten tribal identity and religious purity. Intermarriage with foreign women who worship other gods represents exactly the danger that divine law was designed to prevent. The women who enter Israel's camp bring their religious practices with them. Small shrines appear in family tents. Foreign rituals become part of domestic routines. Children born to these unions face conflicting loyalties between their Hebrew heritage and their mother's cultural traditions. The very fabric of Israelite society begins unraveling through these mixed relationships. The situation reaches critical mass when open worship of Baal Peor occurs within sight of the tabernacle itself. Hebrew men and their Moabite partners conduct fertility rituals that mock everything the central sanctuary represents. The contrast between authentic worship of Yahweh and corrupt imitation worship of foreign deities becomes impossible to ignore or tolerate. Divine patience, stretched thin by 40 years of wilderness, complaints, and rebellions, finally snaps under this ultimate provocation. The God who blessed Israel through Balaam's reluctant oracles now prepares to judge them through consequences of their own choices. The people who could not be cursed by external enemies face divine wrath triggered by internal corruption. The plague strikes suddenly and devastatingly. Families that celebrated their freedom from Egyptian bondage now watch their children die from mysterious illness that spreads rapidly through the camp. The same tents that housed joyful wedding celebrations become scenes of mourning and despair as divine judgment claims its victims. The death toll mounts hourly as leaders struggle to understand what is happening and how to stop it. The connection between religious apostasy and physical disaster becomes clear as those most deeply involved in Baal Peor worship suffer the heaviest casualties. Divine justice operates with surgical precision, targeting those whose actions triggered the crisis. Moses calls for immediate action to halt the spiritual rot that is destroying the community. The people who survived Pharaoh's armies and 40 years of wilderness challenges now face their greatest crisis on the very threshold of entering their promised inheritance. The sin of Peor threatens to accomplish what external enemies could never achieve: the complete destruction of Israel before they can claim their ancestral home. The irony cuts deep as observers recognize the fulfillment of a strategy that official cursing could not accomplish. Balaam's failure to bring divine judgment upon Israel through supernatural means pales beside their success at bringing judgment upon themselves through moral compromise. The prophet who blessed them unwillingly now watches them curse themselves willingly through choices that invite exactly the catastrophe he was hired to create. Phinehas's spear. The plague ravages Israel's camp with relentless fury while leaders debate responses and search for solutions that seem beyond human reach. 24,000 die as divine wrath consumes the people who cannot be destroyed by external enemies, but prove devastatingly vulnerable to internal corruption. The stench of death mingles with smoke from funeral pyres that burn day and night throughout the sprawling encampment. Moses calls the community to assembly, his aged voice carrying across the plains with authority born of decades spent speaking for God. The man who led Israel out of Egyptian bondage now faces the possibility of watching them perish within sight of their promised inheritance. His words ring with desperate urgency as he commands immediate execution of every leader involved in Baal Peor worship. The judges throughout Israel begin their grim work, identifying and condemning those whose apostasy triggered divine judgment. Yet even as official justice proceeds, the plague continues its deadly harvest. Something more than human legal action is required to halt the supernatural catastrophe that threatens to consume the entire nation before they can enter Canaan. In this moment of crisis, an Israelite man brazenly approaches the camp's central area, leading a Midianite woman toward his family tent. The couple moves with shocking boldness, displaying their forbidden relationship openly before the tabernacle where God's presence dwells among the people. Their defiance reaches levels that stagger even those accustomed to rebellion and compromise. The woman is Cosbi, daughter of Zur, a tribal prince among the Midianites. Her royal status makes the relationship even more scandalous, representing not merely personal corruption, but political alliance with enemies of Israel's divine mission. The man is Zimri, son of Salu, a leader within the tribe of Simeon, whose family connections make his apostasy particularly damaging to community morale. They enter the tent while Moses weeps before the tabernacle, overcome by grief at watching his people destroy themselves through choices that mock everything he has sacrificed to achieve. The elderly leader who spoke face to face with God now finds himself helpless to prevent the catastrophe unfolding around him. Human wisdom proves inadequate for crises that require divine intervention. The assembled congregation watches in stunned silence as this ultimate act of defiance unfolds before their eyes. The couple's brazen behavior represents complete rejection of divine authority and communal standards. Their actions declare publicly that foreign gods and foreign relationships matter more than covenant obligations and community survival. Phinehas, son of Eleazar and grandson of Aaron the high priest, witnesses this spectacle with righteous fury that burns hotter than the plague consuming his people. The young priest inherits not only his family's religious authority, but their passionate commitment to divine holiness that tolerates no compromise with evil. His priestly training and personal character combine to produce decisive action when others remain paralyzed. Without hesitation or consultation, Phinehas takes a spear and follows the couple into their tent. The weapon pierces through both bodies with single thrust, joining them in death as they were joined in rebellion. The act carries profound symbolism: divine justice executed through human instrument, corruption punished at its source, holiness defended against ultimate pollution. The execution occurs with surgical precision that suggests divine guidance rather than human rage. Phinehas strikes without missing, killing both transgressors instantly and completely. The spear becomes instrument of divine judgment, wielded by earthly hands but directed by heavenly purpose. The deed accomplishes what legal proceedings and communal pressure could not achieve. The moment the spear finds its mark, the plague halts its deadly progress through Israel's camp. The sudden cessation confirms divine approval of Phinehas's action while demonstrating the supernatural nature of both judgment and deliverance. What human authorities could not stop through official channels, priestly zeal accomplishes through direct intervention. The silence that follows carries weight of divine presence and approval. The God who seemed absent during the crisis now manifests through the courage of one young priest who valued community holiness above personal safety. Phinehas risks his own life to save his people, accepting possible consequences of what others might condemn as vigilante violence. Divine confirmation comes through direct revelation to Moses. God declares eternal priesthood as reward for Phinehas' zealous action. The young priest who defended divine honor receives permanent appointment to serve before the altar, where holiness dwells among the people. His descendants will inherit priestly privileges because their ancestor chose faithfulness over compromise. The covenant of peace granted to Phinehas creates lasting legacy from moment of violent judgment. Divine blessing flows from act that others might consider excessive or inappropriate. The priest who killed to preserve community life receives promise of peaceful prosperity for his family line. Paradox defines the reward as much as the deed itself. The 24,000 who perished in the plague represent enormous cost of moral compromise among God's people. Nearly 4% of Israel's adult male population dies because religious leaders failed to maintain standards that divine law established. The casualty figures dwarf losses from military conflicts throughout the wilderness years. Yet the greater tragedy lies not in numbers, but in timing. These deaths occur on the threshold of entering the Promised Land, when decades of preparation should culminate in triumphant possession of ancestral inheritance. Instead, Israel enters Canaan weakened by internal corruption that external enemies could not inflict upon them. The incident establishes precedent for religious zeal that transcends normal legal procedures when community survival is at stake. Phinehas demonstrates that some situations require immediate action rather than deliberative process. Divine approval validates his choice while warning against tolerating corruption that threatens covenant relationship. The spear that pierced two bodies becomes symbol of divine intolerance for compromise with evil. The weapon represents willingness to act decisively when gradual measures prove inadequate. The instrument of death becomes means of life for community that faces extinction through moral decay. His priestly training and personal character combine to produce decisive action when others remain paralyzed. Without hesitation or consultation, Phinehas takes a spear and follows the couple into their tent. The weapon pierces through both bodies with single thrust, joining them in death as they were joined in rebellion. The act carries profound symbolism. Divine justice executed through human instrument, corruption punished at its source, holiness defended against ultimate pollution. The execution occurs with surgical precision that suggests divine guidance rather than human rage. Phinehas strikes without missing, killing both transgressors instantly and completely. The spear becomes instrument of divine judgment, wielded by earthly hands, but directed by heavenly purpose. The deed accomplishes what legal proceedings and communal pressure could not achieve. The moment the spear finds its mark, the plague halts its deadly progress through Israel's camp. The sudden cessation confirms divine approval of Phinehas' action while demonstrating the supernatural nature of both judgment and deliverance. What human authorities could not stop through official channels, priestly zeal accomplishes through direct intervention. The silence that follows carries weight of divine presence and approval. The God who seemed absent during the crisis now manifests through the courage of one young priest who valued community holiness above personal safety. Phinehas risks his own life to save his people, accepting possible consequences of what others might condemn as vigilante violence. Divine confirmation comes through direct revelation to Moses. God declares eternal priesthood as reward for Phinehas' zealous action. The young priest who defended divine honor receives permanent appointment to serve before the altar where holiness dwells among the people. His descendants will inherit priestly privileges because their ancestor chose faithfulness over compromise. The covenant of peace granted to Phinehas creates lasting legacy from moment of violent judgment. Divine blessing flows from act that others might consider excessive or inappropriate. The priest who killed to preserve community life receives promise of peaceful prosperity for his family line. Paradox defines the reward as much as the deed itself. The 24,000 who perished in the plague represent enormous cost of moral compromise among God's people. Nearly 4% of Israel's adult male population dies because religious leaders failed to maintain standards that divine law established. The casualty figures dwarf losses from military conflicts throughout the wilderness years. Yet the greater tragedy lies not in numbers, but in timing. These deaths occur on the threshold of entering the Promised Land, when decades of preparation should culminate in triumphant possession of ancestral inheritance. Instead, Israel enters Canaan weakened by internal corruption that external enemies could not inflict upon them. The incident establishes precedent for religious zeal that transcends normal legal procedures when community survival is at stake. Phinehas demonstrates that some situations require immediate action rather than deliberative process. Divine approval validates his choice while warning against tolerating corruption that threatens covenant relationship. The spear that pierced two bodies becomes symbol of divine intolerance for compromise with evil. The weapon represents willingness to act decisively when gradual measures prove inadequate. The instrument of death becomes means of life for community that faces extinction through moral decay. As funeral pyres burn throughout the camp and survivors count their losses, the lesson burns into collective memory with intensity that shapes future generations. The people who could not be cursed by professional prophet nearly destroy themselves through casual compromise with foreign religion. The blessing Balaam could not withhold almost becomes curse they bring upon themselves through choices that invite divine judgment. The aftermath reveals the true cost of the sin of Peor while demonstrating God's commitment to preserving the people chosen to inherit Abraham's promises. Divine mercy operates through human courage to halt catastrophe and restore hope for future that seemed lost. The priest's spear becomes instrument of salvation for community that salvation seemed beyond reach. Balaam, the villain. The story takes a dark turn in Numbers chapter 31. Israel prepares for battle against the Midianites. Moses receives divine commands for warfare. Among the casualties listed in the aftermath, one name appears that jolts readers awake. Balaam, son of Beor, falls by the sword. This revelation shifts everything we thought we knew. The prophet who blessed Israel now dies fighting against them. The man who claimed he could only speak God's words perishes as an enemy combatant. Numbers 31, verse 16, reveals the shocking truth. Balaam counseled the Midianite women to seduce Israelite men. He orchestrated the very corruption that brought plague upon the camp. The text presents this without fanfare. No dramatic speeches, no explanations, simply the cold fact that Balaam advised Israel's enemies on how to destroy them from within. When curses failed, he suggested corruption. When direct confrontation proved impossible, he recommended seduction. This transforms our understanding of the earlier narrative. Balaam's hesitation before King Balak takes on new meaning. His repeated consultations with God appear calculated rather than reverent. Perhaps he was always seeking loopholes, ways to profit while maintaining plausible deniability. The prophet who spoke with the divine becomes the architect of spiritual destruction. His oracles blessed Israel's future, while his schemes undermined their present. This contradiction haunts the biblical narrative. How can the same mouth that pronounced God's blessings also devise plans for God's people's downfall? Ancient readers would have recognized this pattern. Court prophets often served multiple masters. They navigated political pressures while claiming divine authority. Balaam represents the ultimate corruption of this role. He used his spiritual gifts for material gain and political maneuvering. The execution of Balaam serves as biblical justice. The man who tried to curse Israel for gold meets his end in battle against them. His death closes the loop on a story that began with King Balak's desperate summons. What started as a tale of mysterious blessing concludes with stark judgment. Yet questions linger in the silence. Did Balaam truly believe his later counsel served some higher purpose? Was he always duplicitous? Or did something change after his encounter with the angel? The text offers no psychological insight. It simply records his transformation from blessed prophet to unlived enemy. This stark reversal influences how later interpreters read the entire Balaam cycle. His earlier speeches become suspect. His apparent piety seems performative. Even his talking donkey encounter takes on different hues when viewed through the lens of his ultimate betrayal. The biblical narrative rarely provides such clear moral reversals. Heroes sometimes stumble, but they rarely become villains so completely. Balaam's arc suggests that spiritual gifts do not guarantee spiritual integrity. Speaking God's words does not ensure following God's ways. His death serves as a warning embedded in Israel's founding stories. Prophets can become false prophets. Divine calling does not provide immunity from divine judgment. The same voice that blessed can also scheme. The same lips that spoke truth can also counsel destruction. Rabbinic views. Jewish tradition wrestled deeply with Balaam's contradictions. The rabbis could not simply dismiss him as a pagan sorcerer. His oracles were too beautiful, too clearly inspired, yet his ultimate treachery demanded explanation. This tension produced centuries of creative interpretation. The Talmud portrays Balaam as a complex figure who possessed genuine prophetic gifts, but lacked moral character. Tractate Sanhedrin describes him as one of 7 Gentile prophets, acknowledging his authentic connection to the divine. However, the same sources emphasize his greed and moral corruption. Rabbi Yochanan taught that Balaam's prophetic ability equaled Moses in some respects. Both received direct divine communication. Both spoke face to face with God. This comparison troubled later sages who struggled to reconcile such spiritual elevation with such moral degradation. Midrashic literature fills the gaps in the biblical narrative with vivid details. Some traditions claim Balaam possessed a magical book containing divine names. Others suggest he could fly through the air or communicate with demons. These embellishments reflect attempts to explain his power while maintaining his fundamental wickedness. The rabbis particularly focused on Balaam's motivations. Why would someone with such extraordinary gifts choose corruption? Some teachings suggest pride was his downfall. He became intoxicated with his own abilities and forgot their divine source. Others point to greed, noting his eagerness for Balak's rewards. Tractate Avot presents a famous comparison between the disciples of Abraham and the disciples of Balaam. Abraham's followers are generous, humble, and content. Balaam's are envious, proud, and greedy. This stark contrast became a teaching tool about the two paths available to humanity. Medieval commentators like Rashi elaborated on these themes. Rashi explains that Balaam's initial refusal to curse Israel was not righteousness but calculation. He knew God's will and feared the consequences of direct disobedience. When he found an indirect path to profit, he seized it eagerly. The Zohar, Judaism's primary mystical text, offers deeper psychological insights. It suggests Balaam represents the shadow side of prophecy. Where Moses channeled divine light for blessing, Balaam twisted the same light toward curse and corruption. Both access the same source, but with opposite intentions. Some rabbinic sources attempt rehabilitation. They argue that Balaam's oracles serve as permanent blessings upon Israel, regardless of his motivations. His words carry divine power that transcends his personal failings. This perspective emphasizes God's ability to work through flawed vessels. However, the predominant rabbinic view remains cautionary. Balaam becomes the archetypal false prophet, warning against the dangers of spiritual gifts divorced from moral integrity. His story teaches that prophecy without righteousness leads to destruction. The rabbis also used Balaam's tale to address contemporary concerns. During periods of persecution, they drew parallels between ancient enemies who sought Israel's destruction and current oppressors. Balaam's ultimate failure provided comfort and hope for divine protection. These interpretive traditions transformed Balaam from a minor biblical character into a major teaching figure. His story became a lens through which to examine questions of prophecy, morality, and divine justice. The rabbis ensured that his complex legacy would continue challenging readers for generations. Christian interpretations. The New Testament writers found in Balaam a powerful symbol for their emerging theology. They transformed the complex biblical prophet into a clear archetype of religious corruption. This interpretation served specific pastoral and theological purposes in the early Christian communities. 2 Peter chapter 2 mentions Balaam alongside other examples of divine judgment. The epistle describes him as one who loved the wages of unrighteousness. This characterization emphasizes greed as his fundamental flaw. Peter uses Balaam to warn against false teachers who corrupt the church for financial gain. The Epistle of Jude echoes this theme, referring to those who have rushed headlong into Balaam's error for profit. Jude presents Balaam as the prototype of mercenary religious leadership. His story becomes a cautionary tale about mixing spiritual authority with material ambition. Revelation chapter 2 introduces the teaching of Balaam as a specific heresy troubling the church in Pergamum. This teaching involves eating food sacrificed to idols and sexual immorality. The connection to the historical Balaam's counsel to corrupt Israel through seduction creates a direct parallel between ancient and contemporary threats. Early church fathers developed these themes further. John Chrysostom preached extensively about Balaam's moral failures. He emphasized how spiritual gifts without virtue lead to destruction. Augustine used Balaam's story to discuss the relationship between divine calling and personal holiness. Medieval Christian interpreters found layers of meaning in Balaam's narrative. Some saw his donkey as representing the humble faithful who see truth more clearly than proud leaders. Others interpreted his oracles as messianic prophecies, particularly the Star out of Jacob passage. The Protestant Reformation brought new perspectives. Martin Luther saw in Balaam a warning about papal corruption. He argued that claiming divine authority while pursuing worldly gain epitomized Roman Catholic errors. This interpretation reflected broader Protestant concerns about clerical morality. Reformed theologians like John Calvin emphasized Balaam's theological significance. Calvin taught that Balaam represents the tension between divine sovereignty and human responsibility. God used even Balaam's corruption to accomplish divine purposes, blessing Israel despite the prophet's ulterior motives. Puritan preachers found rich sermon material in Balaam's story. They used his example to warn against the dangers of spiritual pride and material compromise. Richard Baxter wrote extensively about Balaam's error, defining it as the fundamental confusion of spiritual calling with personal advancement. Modern evangelical interpretation often focuses on Balaam as a warning for contemporary church leadership. His story serves as a cautionary tale about prosperity theology and the commercialization of spiritual gifts. Pastors use his example to discuss the proper relationship between ministry and financial support. Liberal Protestant scholars approach Balaam with greater nuance. They examine the historical and literary context that shaped his portrayal. Some argue that later biblical writers unfairly demonized what was originally a more complex character. Catholic interpretation has evolved through the centuries. While maintaining traditional themes about greed and false prophecy, modern Catholic scholars also explore Balaam's positive contributions. His oracles are recognized as genuine prophecy, even if his motivations were questionable. Contemporary Christian interpretation often emphasizes practical applications. Balaam's story addresses modern questions about integrity in ministry, the proper use of spiritual gifts, and the dangers of compromising truth for personal gain. His narrative continues providing relevant warnings for church communities worldwide. Balaam in Islamic sources. Islamic tradition preserves fascinating perspectives on Balaam that both parallel and diverge from Jewish and Christian interpretations. Known in Arabic as Balaam ibn Bawra, he appears in various Islamic texts as a complex figure whose story carries profound moral lessons. The Quran does not mention Balaam by name, but many Islamic scholars identify him with the mysterious figure described in Surah Al-Araf. This passage tells of a man who received divine signs but slipped away from them. Satan pursued him, and he became among those led astray. The man possessed knowledge of God's greatest name, but misused this power for worldly gain. Classical Islamic commentators like Al-Tabari expanded this identification. They describe Balaam as a righteous man who initially used his prayers and divine knowledge to protect the Israelites. When they approached his land, however, his people pressured him to pray against them. Despite knowing this was wrong, he eventually yielded to their demands. The consequences in Islamic tradition are dramatic. Some accounts describe how Balaam's tongue hung out like a dog's when he attempted to curse the blessed people. Others tell of his prayers reversing upon himself and his followers. These vivid descriptions emphasize the dangers of misusing divine gifts. Ibn Kathir, a prominent medieval Islamic scholar, provides detailed analysis of Balaam's spiritual downfall. He explains that Balaam knew God's greatest name, which gave him tremendous power. However, his attachment to worldly pleasures and social pressure corrupted his intentions. When he tried to use this sacred knowledge for cursing, it turned against him. Some Islamic traditions describe Balaam as originally being among the most righteous people of his time. His prayers could move mountains and bring rain. People traveled great distances to seek his intercession. This makes his eventual corruption even more tragic and instructive. The concept of divine knowledge carries special significance in Islamic interpretation. Balaam represents the danger of possessing sacred wisdom without maintaining spiritual purity. His story warns that even the greatest spiritual achievements can be lost through moral compromise. Medieval Islamic scholars used Balaam's tale to discuss broader theological questions. They explored how divine predestination interacts with human choice. Did God predetermine Balaam's fall, or did his free will lead to destruction? Different schools of Islamic thought approach these questions in various ways. Sufi traditions found particular meaning in Balaam's story. They saw him as representing the ego's ability to corrupt even the highest spiritual states. His tale becomes a warning about the subtle ways pride and attachment can undermine genuine spiritual progress. Some Islamic accounts provide details not found in biblical sources. They describe Balaam's physical transformation as his spiritual corruption manifested. His beautiful appearance became ugly. His melodious voice turned harsh. These changes symbolize the connection between inner and outer reality. The story also appears in Islamic literature as a warning for religious scholars. Those who possess divine knowledge bear special responsibility. Their potential for both good and harm is magnified. Balaam's example reminds scholars to maintain humility and pure intentions. Modern Islamic interpretation continues finding relevance in Balaam's story. Contemporary Muslim scholars use his example to discuss the proper relationship between religious authority and political power. His tale warns against compromising religious principles for social acceptance or material benefit. The Islamic perspective adds valuable dimensions to understanding Balaam's complex legacy. It emphasizes the universal nature of his story's warnings while providing unique insights into the nature of divine knowledge and its proper use. Psychological portrait. Beyond the theological interpretations lies a deeply human story of internal conflict and moral compromise. Balaam emerges as a man caught between competing loyalties, torn by desires that ultimately consumed him. His psychological portrait reveals universal patterns of human weakness and spiritual corruption. At first glance, Balaam appears as a successful religious professional. He has built a reputation that extends across nations. Kings seek his services. His prophetic abilities are widely recognized. This success, however, may have planted the seeds of his eventual downfall. Recognition and influence can intoxicate even the most spiritually gifted individuals. The initial encounter with Balak's messengers reveals crucial aspects of Balaam's character. He does not immediately refuse their request. Instead, he asks them to stay overnight while he consults God. This delay suggests internal conflict. A prophet fully committed to divine will might have refused immediately, knowing that cursing God's chosen people contradicts divine purpose. When God explicitly forbids the journey, Balaam obeys, but seems reluctant. The arrival of a second, more prestigious delegation tests his resolve further. The offer of greater honor and reward apparently weakens his previous certainty. This pattern suggests a man whose spiritual convictions compete with worldly ambitions. God's permission for the second journey carries conditions that Balaam seems to miss or ignore. The divine message is clear: go, but speak only what I tell you. Yet, Balaam's subsequent behavior suggests he still hopes to find a way to profit from the situation while maintaining technical obedience to divine commands. The encounter with the angel reveals Balaam's spiritual blindness. His donkey perceives divine presence while the prophet remains oblivious. This ironic reversal suggests that success and recognition may have dulled his spiritual sensitivity. The very gifts that brought him fame may have become obstacles to genuine spiritual perception. The donkey's rebuke cuts deeper than divine anger. When the animal questions Balaam's violence, it exposes his frustration and inner turmoil. The prophet's willingness to beat his faithful companion reveals a man under tremendous psychological pressure, lashing out at whatever seems to obstruct his plans. During his encounters with Balak, Balaam demonstrates remarkable self-control in his public prophecies. Yet this very control may have required enormous internal suppression. Each blessing he pronounces over Israel contradicts his apparent desire to please his employer and secure payment. The psychological tension between public performance and private desire may have sought release through the counsel he later provides. Unable to curse Israel directly, he finds an indirect path to achieve similar results. This calculated corruption suggests a mind seeking creative solutions to moral constraints. Balaam's ultimate advisory role in Israel's seduction reveals sophisticated understanding of human weakness. He recognizes that external military pressure failed where internal moral corruption might succeed. This insight demonstrates both psychological astuteness and spiritual corruption. The prophet's final appearance in battle against Israel suggests complete psychological transformation. The man who once blessed them now fights alongside their enemies. This dramatic reversal implies either calculated duplicity from the beginning or a gradual erosion of moral boundaries over time. Perhaps Balaam represents the tragedy of spiritual giftedness without character development. His prophetic abilities elevated him socially and financially, but they did not necessarily cultivate wisdom, humility, or integrity. The very success that his gifts brought may have prevented the character growth necessary to handle such power responsibly. His story warns of the psychological dangers inherent in religious authority. The combination of spiritual gifts, public recognition, and financial opportunity creates potent temptations. Without strong moral foundations, even genuine spiritual abilities can become tools of corruption rather than blessing. The talking donkey revisited. The conversation between Balaam and his donkey stands as one of Scripture's most surreal moments. Yet beneath its fantastical surface lie layers of meaning that reward careful examination. This encounter serves as the narrative's psychological and theological centerpiece, revealing truths about perception, authority, and divine communication. The scene begins with escalating frustration. 3 times the donkey refuses to proceed. 3 times Balaam responds with violence. This pattern creates mounting tension while revealing character. The prophet's repeated aggression toward his faithful animal exposes a man whose composure is cracking under pressure. The donkey's superior spiritual perception creates deliberate irony. The beast sees what the prophet cannot. This reversal challenges assumptions about wisdom and spiritual sensitivity. Perhaps those closest to the earth and simplest in nature sometimes perceive divine presence more clearly than those elevated by learning and reputation. When the donkey finally speaks, the conversation proceeds with remarkable normalcy. Balaam does not express surprise at his animal's sudden eloquence. Instead, he engages in rational dialogue, defending his actions and expressing his frustration. This response suggests either the scene's supernatural nature or the prophet's psychological state. The donkey's questions cut to the heart of relationships and trust. Have I ever behaved this way before? The animal appeals to their shared history, reminding Balaam of years of faithful service. This gentle rebuke contrasts sharply with the prophet's violent response to temporary inconvenience. The revelation of the angel transforms everything. Suddenly, Balaam sees what his donkey perceived all along. The sword-bearing divine messenger blocks their path, ready to execute judgment. The donkey's apparent obstinacy was actually salvation, protecting both animal and rider from destruction. This moment of recognition brings profound humiliation. The celebrated prophet must acknowledge that his humble beast possessed greater spiritual insight. The reversal is complete. The wise man appears foolish, while the simple animal demonstrates wisdom. Such inversions appear throughout Scripture, challenging human pride and presumption. The angel's words carry ominous weight. Balaam's journey is described as perverse or reckless. Despite God's permission to travel, something about the prophet's intentions or attitudes has triggered divine opposition. This suggests that obedience to divine commands requires not just external compliance, but internal alignment. The donkey's deliverance of both lives creates a powerful metaphor. Sometimes salvation comes through unexpected sources. Those we consider beneath us may become instruments of divine protection. The humble and lowly often perceive truths that escape the sophisticated and proud. The entire encounter functions as a mirror, reflecting Balaam's spiritual condition. His inability to see the angels suggests compromised spiritual vision. His violence toward the donkey reveals frustration and moral confusion. His acceptance of the animal's speech implies either supernatural experience or psychological displacement. The scene also operates as foreshadowing. Just as the donkey spoke contrary to its nature to deliver God's message, Balaam will soon speak contrary to his intentions to deliver God's blessings. Both examples demonstrate divine sovereignty over communication, using unexpected voices to accomplish divine purposes. The talking donkey episode serves as the story's emotional climax. All the building tension between competing loyalties, divine will, and human ambition culminates in this moment of crisis and revelation. The supernatural intervention forces clarity where confusion had reigned. Modern readers might struggle with the scene's literal details, but its symbolic power remains accessible. We all have moments when those around us perceive dangers we miss. Sometimes our assumptions about wisdom and authority prove incorrect. Occasionally, salvation comes from unexpected sources that challenge our prejudices and pride. The donkey's speech reminds us that divine truth can emerge from any source. Prophets and kings may miss what servants and animals perceive clearly. This reversal of expectations runs throughout Scripture, celebrating the humble while warning the proud. The paradox of prophecy. The Balaam narrative confronts readers with a troubling theological puzzle. How can someone speak authentic words from God while harboring corrupt intentions? This paradox challenges simple assumptions about the relationship between spiritual gifts and moral character, forcing deeper examination of divine communication and human agency. Traditional religious thinking often assumes that spiritual abilities reflect spiritual maturity. Those who prophesy, heal, or demonstrate supernatural knowledge must possess corresponding moral elevation. Balaam's story shatters this comfortable assumption, presenting a figure whose prophetic gifts operate independently of his character development. The biblical text provides no doubt about the authenticity of Balaam's oracles. His blessings over Israel prove accurate and enduring. His prophecies about future nations carry divine authority. Yet the same mouth that pronounced these truths also counseled corruption and destruction. This creates cognitive dissonance that interpreters have struggled to resolve. One approach suggests that God can use anyone as an instrument of divine communication, regardless of their spiritual state. Just as God spoke through Balaam's donkey, divine truth can emerge from unexpected and even unwilling sources. This perspective emphasizes divine sovereignty over human cooperation in prophetic communication. However, this explanation raises additional questions. If God can speak through anyone, what distinguishes true prophets from false ones? How should communities evaluate prophetic claims when moral character provides no reliable indicator? Balaam's example complicates efforts to establish criteria for authentic divine communication. Another interpretation focuses on timing and development. Perhaps Balaam began as a genuine prophet whose character deteriorated over time. Success, wealth, and recognition may have gradually corrupted his initial purity. His prophetic gifts remained while his moral foundation eroded, creating the contradiction his story presents. The text suggests that Balaam's corruption may have been progressive rather than sudden. His initial reluctance to curse Israel shows some moral restraint. His later counsel to corrupt them through seduction represents a more calculated and thorough abandonment of ethical principles. This progression implies that spiritual gifts do not provide immunity from moral decline. Balaam's paradox also illuminates the complex relationship between divine will and human cooperation. His oracles blessed Israel despite his apparent desire to curse them. This suggests that God's purposes can be accomplished even through reluctant or corrupted instruments. Divine sovereignty operates through human agency while transcending human limitations and failures. The story warns against both extremes in evaluating spiritual claims. We cannot simply assume that supernatural abilities indicate moral authority. Neither can we dismiss all prophetic claims from flawed individuals. The challenge lies in discerning divine truth while maintaining appropriate skepticism about human motives and character. Balaam's experience also reveals the danger of separating spiritual gifts from spiritual formation. Prophetic abilities without corresponding character development create unstable and potentially dangerous situations. The power to speak for God requires the wisdom and integrity to handle such authority responsibly. Contemporary religious communities continue wrestling with these issues. How should they respond to leaders who demonstrate spiritual gifts but questionable character? When should supernatural abilities be trusted, and when should moral failures invalidate spiritual claims? Balaam's story provides no easy answers but insists on serious engagement with these questions. The paradox suggests that divine communication serves purposes beyond the immediate vessel through which it flows. Balaam's blessings over Israel accomplish God's intentions regardless of his personal motivations. This perspective emphasizes the ultimate triumph of divine purposes while acknowledging the complex human dynamics involved in their fulfillment. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in recognizing prophecy as a divine gift that demands human responsibility. Those who receive such gifts bear special obligations to develop corresponding character and wisdom. The separation of spiritual abilities from moral development leads to corruption and ultimately to judgment. Balaam and Balak. The ancient encounter between prophet and king resonates across millennia, finding expression in literature, politics, and contemporary culture. These two figures have become archetypes representing enduring human patterns of power, corruption, and moral compromise that continue playing out on modern stages. Dante immortalized Balaam in his Inferno, placing the corrupt prophet among the soothsayers in the eighth circle of hell. The medieval poet understood Balaam's essential sin as the prostitution of divine gifts for personal gain. Dante's portrayal influenced centuries of European literature, establishing Balaam as a symbol of religious corruption. Shakespeare's characters echo Balaam's themes without directly referencing his story. Figures like Iago and Edmund represent the same pattern of using trusted positions to accomplish destructive purposes. These villains manipulate appearance and reality, presenting themselves as loyal while plotting betrayal. Modern political commentary frequently invokes Balaam-like scenarios. Leaders who claim moral authority while pursuing personal advantage mirror his pattern. The prophet who blessed publicly while scheming privately becomes a template for understanding political hypocrisy and the corruption of public trust. The relationship between Balaam and Balak also speaks to contemporary dynamics between religious and political power. King Balak represents political leaders who seek to co-opt spiritual authority for their purposes. Balaam embodies religious figures who allow themselves to be purchased by worldly powers. Contemporary televangelists and prosperity preachers sometimes face accusations of following the way of Balaam. Critics argue that they transform spiritual gifts into financial enterprises, selling blessings and curses for personal enrichment. This parallel demonstrates the enduring relevance of ancient warnings about commercializing divine authority. The story's themes appear in corporate and institutional contexts as well. Consultants and advisors who tell clients what they want to hear rather than what they need to know follow Balaam's pattern. The temptation to provide favorable analysis in exchange for continued employment creates modern versions of his moral compromise. Academic and intellectual communities wrestle with similar dynamics. Scholars who adjust their findings to secure funding or approval face Balaam-like temptations. The pressure to produce politically acceptable research can corrupt the pursuit of truth, just as royal gold corrupted prophetic integrity. Social media and contemporary communication amplify these patterns. Influencers and opinion leaders may begin with authentic messages, but gradually adjust their content to maximize engagement and revenue. The transition from genuine communication to performed authenticity mirrors Balaam's spiritual decline. International relations provide another arena where Balaam and Balak dynamics emerge. Nations seeking religious or moral legitimacy for questionable policies often court respected voices to provide such endorsement. The resulting compromises between principle and pragmatism echo ancient patterns. The democratization of media has created millions of potential Balaams. Anyone with a platform faces temptations to monetize their influence or adjust their message for popularity. The same technologies that enable authentic communication also facilitate sophisticated forms of manipulation and corruption. Environmental and social justice movements sometimes struggle with Balaam like challenges. Leaders who begin with genuine commitment may gradually compromise their principles for funding, access, or recognition. The corruption of good intentions through institutional pressures follows familiar patterns. Balaam and Balak's story also illuminates the complexity of modern ethical decision-making. Their encounter reveals how good and evil can become entangled in ways that resist simple moral categories. Contemporary leaders face similar challenges in navigating competing obligations and pressures. The enduring power of their story lies in its refusal to provide easy answers. Balaam remains a troubling figure whose legacy defies simple categorization. His example continues challenging readers to examine their own motivations and the subtle ways that integrity can be compromised. Modern adaptations often focus on the psychological dimensions of their relationship. Film and literature explore the internal conflicts that drive people to betray their principles. These works recognize that understanding corruption requires examining not just external pressures, but internal vulnerabilities. Lessons and warnings. The story of Balaam refuses to conclude with comfortable moral lessons. Instead, it leaves readers with unsettling questions and sobering warnings that resist easy resolution. This narrative complexity reflects the genuine ambiguity of human moral experience, where good and evil often intertwine in unexpected ways. Balaam's tale warns against the seductive power of recognition and reward. His reputation as a prophet brought him wealth, influence, and royal attention. These very benefits, however, may have gradually eroded his spiritual foundations. Success can become a trap, creating dependencies that compromise integrity and independence. The story also reveals how spiritual gifts can become sources of temptation rather than blessing. Balaam's prophetic abilities opened doors that led to corruption. The power to speak for God carried responsibilities he ultimately failed to honor. This warns contemporary readers about the dangers inherent in any form of spiritual or moral authority. Religious communities find particular relevance in Balaam's example. His story illustrates how easily sacred callings can be commercialized and corrupted. The boundary between legitimate support for religious work and the prostitution of spiritual gifts requires constant vigilance to maintain. The narrative challenges assumptions about divine communication and human cooperation. God's purposes were accomplished through Balaam, despite his flawed character and mixed motives. This suggests that divine sovereignty operates through human agency while transcending human limitations. Even corrupted instruments can serve divine purposes. Balaam's progressive moral decline offers insights into how corruption typically develops. He did not suddenly transform from prophet to villain. Instead, small compromises and gradual accommodations accumulated until his original identity was unrecognizable. This pattern warns against seemingly minor ethical adjustments that can lead to major moral failures. The story emphasizes the importance of internal integrity alongside external performance. Balaam's public prophecies blessed Israel, while his private counsel sought their destruction. This split between appearance and reality demonstrates the danger of compartmentalizing moral commitment and the impossibility of maintaining such divisions indefinitely. Political leaders and advisors find warnings in the Balaam and Balak relationship. The king's attempt to purchase prophetic legitimacy for his policies reflects enduring patterns of power seeking religious endorsement. Balaam's initial resistance, followed by eventual accommodation, shows how such pressure can gradually erode principled opposition. The talking donkey episode provides perhaps the story's most important lesson about perception and humility. Those in positions of authority may become blind to realities that others perceive clearly. Wisdom can emerge from unexpected sources, while expertise and reputation provide no guarantee of insight or understanding. Balaam's ultimate fate serves as a stark reminder that consequences follow actions, regardless of intentions or justifications. His death in battle against Israel represents the logical conclusion of his choices. The man who blessed Israel with his mouth while plotting their destruction through his counsel found himself numbered among their enemies. The story refuses to provide simple categories for evaluating moral behavior. Balaam speaks divine truth while harboring corrupt intentions. He demonstrates genuine prophetic gifts while planning treacherous counsel. This complexity mirrors real-world moral situations where good and evil resist clear separation. Contemporary readers face similar challenges in evaluating religious and political leaders. Balaam's example warns against both extremes, dismissing all claims from flawed individuals and accepting all assertions from those who demonstrate spiritual gifts. Discernment requires careful attention to both character and claims. The narrative also speaks to questions of divine justice and mercy. God used even Balaam's corruption to accomplish divine purposes, blessing Israel through an unwilling prophet. Yet this same God held Balaam accountable for his choices, allowing natural consequences to unfold. This balance between sovereignty and responsibility runs throughout Scripture. Perhaps the deepest warning concerns the possibility of self-deception. Balaam may have convinced himself that his various compromises served some higher purpose. The human capacity for rationalization allows people to maintain good opinions themselves while engaging in increasingly questionable behavior. The story's refusal to provide easy answers forces readers to examine their own lives and choices. Where might success be creating dangerous temptations? How could recognition and reward be subtly corrupting integrity? What small compromises might be accumulating toward larger moral failures? Balaam's legacy serves as a mirror, reflecting back the complexity and ambiguity of human moral experience. His story warns against simple categories while insisting on moral responsibility. It challenges readers to pursue integrity while recognizing their own capacity for self-deception and corruption. The final echo. We return to where this strange journey began. A road stretches through ancient landscape. A prophet rides toward his destiny. A donkey sees what human eyes cannot perceive. The angel waits with drawn sword, guardian of divine purposes that transcend human understanding. The conversation between man and beast still echoes across centuries. Its absurdity masks profound truth about wisdom and blindness, authority and humility, the unexpected sources of divine revelation. In this moment of supernatural communication, all assumptions about intelligence and insight crumble. Balaam, son of Beor, remains one of Scripture's most enigmatic figures. Neither purely hero nor simple villain, he embodies the complexity of human moral experience. His story refuses the comfort of easy categories, forcing readers to confront uncomfortable questions about integrity, authority, and the corruption of good intentions. The prophet who spoke blessings while harboring curses represents tensions that exist in every human heart. The desire for righteousness wars with ambition for recognition. The call to serve others competes with the drive for personal advancement. These internal conflicts shape moral choices in ways both subtle and profound. King Balak fades from memory, his desperate schemes ultimately futile. The curses he sought to purchase became blessings he could not prevent. His gold could not corrupt divine purposes, though it succeeded in corrupting the prophet he employed. Power seeks legitimacy but cannot manufacture it through financial transaction. The donkey disappears from the narrative after its moment of supernatural speech. Yet its brief eloquence illuminates truth more clearly than volumes of human wisdom. Sometimes the humblest voices carry the most important messages. Divine communication flows through channels that human pride would never expect or approve. The angel returns to invisible realms, its mission accomplished. Divine justice operates through human choices while transcending human limitations. Even corruption becomes an instrument of divine purpose, though this provides no excuse for those who choose moral compromise over integrity. Israel receives blessings they never requested through a prophet they never met. Divine favor operates according to principles beyond human manipulation or control. The nation's destiny unfolds through complex interactions of divine sovereignty and human agency, blessing and judgment, faithfulness and failure. The oracles Balaam spoke continue resonating through history. His words about Israel's future proved prophetic in ways their original speaker may never have understood. Truth spoken for wrong reasons remains truth. Divine communication transcends the limitations and corruptions of its human vessels. Modern readers encounter their own crossroads when engaging this ancient tale. The same temptations that corrupted Balaam operate in contemporary contexts. Success, recognition, and reward create similar moral challenges. The story provides no easy answers but insists on serious moral reflection. The talking donkey reminds us that wisdom appears in unexpected forms. Those we consider authorities may possess blind spots that simpler souls perceive clearly. Divine truth flows through channels that challenge human assumptions about intelligence, education, and spiritual sophistication. Balaam's final fate serves as sobering reminder that choices carry consequences. The prophet who spoke blessings while planning destruction found himself numbered among Israel's enemies. Moral compromise creates trajectories that lead toward judgment, regardless of initial intentions or subsequent rationalizations. The story concludes without resolution, its tensions unresolved, and its questions unanswered. This reflects the complexity of moral experience where good and evil intertwine in ways that resist simple analysis. Life rarely provides the clarity that moral instruction demands. We close with the image that began our journey. The road continues beyond the narrative's end, stretching toward horizons we cannot see. Each reader must choose which direction to travel. The crossroads of moral decision appear in every generation, demanding choices that shape both individual destiny and collective future. The prophet and his donkey have spoken their parts. Their strange conversation echoes still, challenging assumptions and revealing truths that comfortable religion would prefer to ignore. In their brief encounter, the supernatural invades the ordinary, transforming a simple journey into a meditation on divine purposes and human choices. The echo fades, but never disappears completely. Somewhere along ancient roads, the conversation continues. Divine truth still flows through unexpected channels. Angels still guard divine purposes. Donkeys still see what prophets miss. The story waits for new readers to discover its unsettling wisdom and enduring warnings.